1 second. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the January 17th, 2024 Board of Education meeting, which I would like to call to order, and I will ask our consultant, Andrew, to go ahead and lead us in the pledge. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. I am going to turn things over to our superintendent. We are really here for one thing on the work session agenda this evening, which is a facilities update where we're going to go over the results of a recent facility survey, traffic study, and scope of anticipated work in the facilities plan that I think we have been discussing at this board table in one form or another for well over a year now. So I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. All right. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to this chilly January and the snow and ice that we have been having. So I'm pretty excited about tonight's evening because we have a lot on our agenda. First of all, I want to welcome to everyone to this special Board of Education workshop on facilities. And tonight I welcome and I thank our panelists. We have our consultants. First of all, our Assistant Superintendent, Alita Zuber, who will be joining us shortly because we were just on a Zoom and she was on in another building. We also have tonight joining us our Director of Facilities, Jared Mance. Good evening, Jared. And I have to give Jared a huge shout out because we've had a couple of challenging days with our facilities with snow and with ice. And Jared, thank you for everything that you do. Yes, definitely. Our guru of transportation, Jim Menahan, and security is also here this evening. And Jim is a 4 a.m. call with me in the morning. Mary, what's going on? How are the roads? So again, thank you, Jim, and we're thrilled that you're here to join us tonight for later on in our panel conversation. Right? We also have joining with us tonight our architects, Chris Colby and Chris Ladani. We've got Dave Hastings from CPL, David, right? David Hastings? Either or, okay, from CPL, a traffic consultant and expertise using state modelings, and everyone is anxious for your report. We have joining us with ourselves this evening, we've got Paul Tazi. Paul is the head and leader of Aris Construction, and we have Andrew Watkins, who is also with Fiscal Advisors, and joining us by, and I forget your name. John Wick, that's right, John Wick. Okay, so thank you, John, for this evening. All right. Tonight we continue our work regarding and our conversation and collaboration regarding our facilities. We are really focused on the capital investment of our school and continuing the conversation about our plans. We generally here recognize this evening, in short, that we have given consistent and annual attention, and the board has shown that we are trying to address our facilities ways in all ways, big and small. This school district has shown repeatedly, year after year, through the work of the Board of Education, to Dr. Sanchez, Alita Zubar, Jared, and many in the administration, that a continual attention to the facilities through community-approved bonds, budget items, capital improvement systems, energy performance contracts, extending end-of-life efficiencies, painting, addressing, fixing the front of the building, creating new traffic lanes, and adding security upgrades and programming changes. But short, in many ways, we have often found that the house that we're living in right now no longer meets our instructional and programming needs. Our buildings were constructed at a time when our facilities, our needs were narrower and our mandated instruction were simpler and far more narrow. Today, we generally recognize that our buildings can no longer provide optimal teaching and learning environments, and indeed, significant compromises are made each and every day. And our goal is to take a look at what a facilities framework has begun. and what that facilities framework looks like since the year 2020, when the Facilities Committee started with a 30,000-foot view. They answered some important questions. What are the 21st century instructional needs that are not being addressed sufficiently? What compromises are being made and should no longer be made? And what limitations are driving the instructional program? Or are our student needs driving the instructional program rather than the facilities? And last, what is the financial plan to leverage and maximize significant New York State building aid and use capital reserves to minimize the local tax impact of all stages of this plan for local taxpayers? Deep conclusions for discussion we have arrived at, thus our continued conversation tonight. Where is consensus that we have major instructional space constraints? We have a key misalignment between needs and dedicated spaces, and instructional continuity is impacted by the current grade organization. And we have significant shortage of support spaces for related services, 504, students with disabilities, AIS services, and we have substandard common spaces. The biggest one, which we're all aware of, is OHS, has a cafeteria capacity for 300 students, and yet we have 1,635 students enrolled at the high school. We also know that there's research behind the impact of space challenges. The Harvard School of Public Education lists 5 important ones, and they're solid in their recommendations. Buildings that are overcrowded generate the 5 following impacts. There is greater noise and distractions. There is less personalized instruction. There's an increase in student management issues and disciplinary problems. There's poor building of environmental conditions in areas that don't align with others, and there's an increase in illness risk. How do we address this misalignment? We are in need of a capital improvement plan that has multiple cases for it and multiple pieces associated with it. Just as a quick overview, in our elementary school, class sizes are at the highest levels, and there is no more room for any additional sections of dual language. We have the demand and we have a waiting list. Many music classes and performance classes do not have dedicated spaces. Compromised places include the use of stages in the cafeteria for classes, and staff spend an inordinate amount of time dealing with the challenges of space. There's a great deal of pressure upon the notion that art on a cart and the libraries and cafeterias will also become more compromised spaces. You have multiple PE classes due to the lack of gym spaces, and you have extended and long lunch periods because cafeterias in the schools cannot handle the enrollment in each building. These are just the general overviews outside of the classrooms. Let me highlight just a little bit again for everyone who's listening, the challenges as we're here at AMD. Room utilization during the day is at 100%, and in key periods it's over 100%. There are compromised spaces and very crowded hallways. Students feel the need to shove their way through. This creates overstimulation, anxiety, and tension. 51 teachers share classrooms for multiple periods, and that leads to a loss of instructional time. Common space utilization, the cafeteria, gym, and library cannot meet the demands for the space that is being requested. And there are shared spaces for the neediest of children, which again are compromised. You have speech and reading delivered in small shared spaces. From the high school level, high school has no more capacity. At 3 periods of the day, you're at 107% room utilization. We know the research says 80% is for optimal scheduling. Student needs and programming match with teacher certifications and availability should drive your programming needs in a high school. Right now, our programming needs are being driven by the facility itself. Hallways are dense, it creates anxiety, it's a challenge for students to navigate. We have right now at OHS 62 teachers that share at least 1 period and 58 that share 2 or more. Thus, you have 120 teachers at Ossining High School who must share a classroom and are known anecdotally as the backpack teacher. There is no space for lunch for students. To be used for different instructional purposes and/or the district office, renovate and expand elementary school buildings. Right. So tonight, and I need to remind the community, I've been speaking about this in two parts. The first part is that part one is use of district money. District money includes capital reserves, a general line of thank you, thank you, and then transfer from reserves in order to do that. For those of you who might be driving past Park School, you will see scaffolding going up, and we're going to be adding classrooms and expanding cafeteria space and additional space in that building and upgrading infrastructure. We'll start groundwork this summer for Brookside in terms of adding additional classrooms there as well. But at some point, the district doesn't have enough money to take over the others, so the potential for a bond is there. So tonight, we're going to go through, again, our overview. We have Paul here who can speak, just give a brief overview of the breakdown per building of what the work looks like. We could probably spend 3 hours on that. And if you've ever heard Paul give an explanation on that, he will just capture you in that conversation with that level of specificity. But again, our goal isn't to do that. It's just to give an outline, a brief outline of that. It's in everyone's presentation, and for folks who get it at home or read it on board docs, if you click on the link, you will see the detail that Paul is going to get into. Just briefly as we go through this, but the information is there for everyone. We're going to go through the survey data. I'm going to go through that right now. The project scope and cost estimates, and then I know what everyone is anxious to hear, the results of the traffic study. We have Dave Hastings here who will go through that. And again, Dave gave a riveting and fascinating explanation. If you want to know anything about algorithms, about how you do traffic studies in the state of New York, stay tuned because you will hear that. But there's important ramifications of that study for our work on facilities here. And then we are going to encourage, and this will involve Jared and Jim and Alita as well, a panel discussion with the Board of Education with any additional questions they have, which I know they do, about the work with on facilities. So, all right. And let me just go to, I have to go back to the survey data. Hold on, let me go back. Okay, all right. Okay, just as a brief update before I show you the survey data, it's just to share with everyone here tonight what we've been doing about engaging and communicating with the community. In November and December, we had an Explore and Learn, and we had 3 trustees who participated in those. The Board of Education held an additional November board meeting. We have tonight's board meeting. I've been attending school-specific faculty meetings to date. I've presented at Park, Brookside, Claremont, Roosevelt, AMD, and OHS will take place later this month. Received a lot of positive comments from faculty and questions along many different areas. We held evening events at Claremont, AMD, and OHS. The community survey that we sent out, which is just really a pulse check or just a way to gauge community feelings and reaction. It's not an official survey. The traffic study was complete. The data will be presented this evening. And there is a review of potential bond financing and risk mitigation strategies that was presented and fielded by Alita, our Assistant Superintendent for Business, our fiscal advisors, and construction managers. That recording of that meeting can be found on our facilities website. It goes into a lot of granularity around the financing, which many people have questions about. Okay? The updated plan to move certain options, meaning if the board chooses to do that, we can move the AMD HVAC work to Part 1, which means using district money, and the board can decide to add an egress driveway to Part 1 using district funding to talk about the potential bond scope and costs, right? So let me just go back, because I can't find the link to my survey here that I had. Doesn't make any sense. There it is. Okay, let me just do that piece first. Okay, so the demographic profile of, and I apologize to everybody, these were in like 5 different presentations earlier today, and I probably spent with Nicole a whole bunch of time merging them into one, and this isn't where I thought I put it, but here it is now. Okay, so we handed out we asked the community to complete a survey in December, with promise that we would present the results here in January. We had a nice return. We had a really great level of responses. We had 645 responses to the survey. After tonight, the survey and the data will be found on the facilities website of the section. More than 63% who responded to the survey were between the ages of 35 and 54. Just under 12 were over the age of 65. 50% had children in the schools. 50 did not or are not yet ready to send them to schools. Of those, 33% had no children in the schools, yet 13% as identified as having students being graduated. And you're going to see throughout the survey a breakdown to the different categories of these demographic groups. Only 19% were non-resident, meaning non-resident district employees. Again, it was conducted in December. It's important to know this was a self-select survey. There's no statistical reliability. There's no correlation to any of this to the district voter rolls. It's an engagement tool the board asked to use to increase ongoing dialogue and to gain some important feedback. There was strong participation, according to our demographic people who do this type of work, across the typical cohorts, meaning strong participation by parents, staff, and folks that had no children in school. And you can see the disaggregation into different levels of perception in the data. Okay? Outside of we got through the demographic questions, question 7 on the survey basically states which description best defines your level of awareness, meaning of project investigations. 60% described awareness as very aware or somewhat aware. 18% described awareness as extremely aware. So again, I think that's important data for the board to hear and for the community here. So the awareness factor, trying to communicate, we need to continue the community outreach along these lines. But again, only 22% described awareness as not so aware or not aware at all. And again, at the side, you can see the breakdown into the different demographic groups. Did you read any information, witness a presentation, or participate at a workshop or an event? The awareness of the plan. The project was developed in a deliberate manner, and intentional efforts to raise awareness and invite feedback did not occur really on a bigger, broader level until October. So within that context, it is encouraging that awareness is relatively robust, as was engagement, suggesting that the project will receive significant attention and scrutiny. We have people's attention. Right? Question 9. From your own personal experience, how would you describe the physical conditions of the school buildings? 76% describe the condition as good or satisfactory. 22%, the condition as poor, and 2% as excellent. So I have to credit the board and Dr. Sanchez and Jared and and the administration and Alida Zuber for being good stewards of the public trust. Facilities are an important asset of a community. And this board has dedicated itself year after year of engaging in capital improvement projects. And I think that's what this shows, that you drive up to the buildings are painted, they're well kept, the board tweaks it, you've done have spaces that are no longer meeting our needs while they're in good condition. It reminds me a lot of a house. You start out, you get married, you get a starter house, or you start your life out with a small apartment or whatever you choose to do, and at one point in life, no matter how well you kept it, you will outgrow its needs. And that's my interpretation as to where we are as a school district. Okay. Loosely speaking, the three major cohorts responded as follows to this question. The staff, the physical condition of the buildings is largely poor to satisfactory. There are the teachers that are the backpack teachers. They're the people that have to share space on a regular basis. So they would have a different lens on the facility itself. The physical condition from parents is that it's good as satisfactory. And the same for people with no folks in the schools. The district will have to work hard to convince people to support this investment. 32% strongly agree, 48% agree. 8% disagree, 1% disagree, and 12% say they do not know or are unsure. Right. So again, because we have to convince people or just to put forth the rationale or present why this is needed. That's why this evening is taking place. That's why we have our panel of experts here. Again, because I think the board really realizes this conclusion, I don't think is any surprise to members of this Board of Education. Okay. This plan is comprehensive, but I fear its size may concern a lot of voters. 23% strongly agree, 48% agree. 7 disagree, 2% disagree strongly, and 21% say they do not know or are unsure. So again, the thoughtfulness and the depth and breadth of the project that people put forth into this plan is comprehensive. People agree with it, but again, because of the size of the comprehensive plan, folks feel that it may be of a concern to voters. Is it an appropriate solution? 32% say yes, it is well designed. 10 say no, too ambitious and should be scaled back. 29% said they don't know. 21% like the project but aren't sure it will be approved. It's almost like, well, I like it, but I don't know if we'll be able to get there. And 9% say no, it's too expensive. So that's to assessing support. Okay. This survey, I need to be cautious about this and remind folks, is only a snapshot in time, and it's certainly not scientific, right? It's not a cohort sampling nor a mixed voter qualification, chronic or occasional voters. It recognizes two things. First one, there's a hard level of support at about 1/3 of the respondents of this survey, a hard level of support. And there's a hard level of disapproval at about 1/5 of the respondents of this survey. A further 1/5 of the respondents seemed inclined to be supportive, but in identifying that they don't trust the community to approve it, and they project their own lack of conviction about the project because of that. Right? And again, people can interpret this, but again, from our consultant who we work with, the most meaningful response, however, is those who are unsure about whether this is an appropriate solution, as they have not accepted the plan as right for Ossining. With roughly 3 in 10 respondents feeling this way, we can liken them to independents who are much more open to candidates needing to make a case for themselves and reserving judgment to a later date. So that's just some feedback from our consultant who put together the survey. This is a relatively high rate of uncertainty. So that is the survey results. We're going to place this on the board website for the community to see. Okay. So I'd like to turn over to, let me see where this is in here. Okay. All right, let me go back. Okay. All right, so Paul, if you don't mind, all right? So Paul will come up and go through a little bit of an overview. And again, we don't want to take an hour on this, Paul. We are mindful.
No
but
problem.
again, just for you folks to get an idea, because we did hear in conversations, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, well, how did you come up with the new construction would be 142 million, right?
Right.
So there is a formula for all of this, and Paula will go over a brief overview as to how we arrived at those.
Okay, let me give you a little bit of background first in that I'm not working independently on this. The scope is actually developed by your architectural team, CPL, in conjunction with us. What we do then is, as they start developing the scope of the project and what is the need of the project or of the schools, we start putting cost associated with that. So we're very familiar with your schools. We've been here for a number of years. So we start going through, look at their concept designs and start costing them out. So, and we do that school by school. At the same time, we develop a sequencing plan. And what this does is we have to schedule the project out so that we know when this can possibly be built, taking into consideration the state education timeline, the time it takes to design, the time it takes to review, put it out to bid, and then start construction. So we build all that into the schedule. Now, the schedule isn't just basic. And we can factor in the escalation. And then again, those numbers get fed over to your fiscal advisors so that they can start working on their end of the project, of which is how to finance it. So this is an overview, and this is just a small slide of basically how this breaks down per school. And as you can see, the high school is about 74.6 million. The 7-8 new construction is 142. Roosevelt is figured as 10.2. Brookside Elementary School at 12.4 and Claremont at 16.4. So some of the important parts that everybody asks is this an all-inclusive number, or what is in this number? So we have to take into account all the costs that are associated with projects such as this, which some of it is in soft costs. Soft cost covers architects, engineers, fiscal advisors, the geotechnical engineers, the environmental engineers, the testing, monitoring, and inspections, special inspections, material testing, all the things like that. All the aspects of a project, a public work project such as this, that are not tied into, let's say, sticks and bricks is what the soft cost is. At the same time, we have to basically factor in when we're building new space or renovating space that you're going to need furniture. So we add into the cost a 3% furniture allowance, which is added on to the cost of construction. So after we add all this together and we put the escalation in, the escalation factor, even though we've capped out at 9%, not last year, the year before, it has ticked back down. We're estimating that the escalation should be about 3% a year. So that's what we factored into this project. So this project came out to $255 or $256 million. Then we break, that's again, that's condensing it, and then we start expanding it. Now, we work in reverse, in that we work in very small aspects of the project, and then we put them all together, and then we condense them for presentation format. But this is the next level of the project, or next level, which breaks down each area or each school into multiple sections. So on the project summary, we have in the high school, we have the church building, the site improvements around the church building, because there's a pretty extensive site package that needs to go in there. The new STEAM addition, and that site improvements is to build that STEAM addition. The locker room renovations, music wing, and student commons. On this project, as we were moving forward, we had to figure out how to start this project. And one of the things we were doing was, the locker room addition is where we're going to start the project, mainly because what we need to do is create swing space. The problem with working in a lot of schools, such as the high school, is that, as Mary has indicated prior, it's over capacity. So there's no space in the existing building that we could take from you to build something in its place. So we have to create our own swing space. That starts out with the locker room addition, because it becomes a 3-story addition, renovating the locker rooms on the 1st story, and it gains additional space that we can move programs into while we start taking away other space to renovate. So it starts there. That building also creates a connection from the church building, which is going to be the church and STEAM building, into the main building, because we have to create that connection, or there would be no way to really access the church building easily by the students, easily and safely. So it starts there, moves on to the church and the STEAM building, and then moves into the music wing and student commons. So that's the progression of the high school. At the same time, we're figuring, moving on to the 7-8 campus, or this campus here, we would start working on the site work in the same timeline, and the new 7-8 building. Now, the 7-8 building is a little easier in sequencing, because it's on a new site and we can go in there. So you're going to get also economies of scale. When the contractors look at the project and they look at a new building on a standalone site, they can price it aggressively, because they know that the school operations are not going to hinder the construction. So you usually get a benefit for a building that is separated from the rest of the construction. So we have the new play areas, the 7-8 building. The chart you're looking at, also one of the other things it's doing is, from that sequencing schedule, you could see what year the majority of costs are going to be incurred. And that's what this chart here lays out. So those are the major projects of this bond. From there, we would fit in Brookside, Claremont, and Roosevelt. Roosevelt being completed after the 7-8 building would open up, because we would need to move the 7th grade, the 7th and 8th grade over, and then move the 5th grade up, which will free up Roosevelt. So that's what this one basically tells us. So it breaks down the project into what year the costs are going to be, and then we basically run it out, and we still have the 256. Now in here, there's, and I'm not sure how to get to. Oh, So what you saw with this plan here, which is a detail, this is a little more detail, which we just went over. From there, you're going to see some more detail that moves in. And again, all of these reports that you're looking at are summary reports. So there are reports that go deeper into more detail from here, which start breaking costs down and how this was figured. But as you can see here, and I'm not going to go through, there's like 12 pages of this. So, and that's the summary portion. And this is going to go through what each portion of that phase is. So when you look at site improvements around the church and the STEAM building, you got temporary fencing, erosion control, the cuts and fills, parking, drainage, repaving, that type of, all those type of items. In the church, you have the, temporary scaffolding, the exterior stone repair, the gutting of the interior, and rebuilding it. So we try to break down the project into its smallest component so we can get a handle on what the cost of building that or reconstructing that is. And this is what this report goes through. The mechanical systems on the upgrade electrical and the mechanical systems go in. Same thing goes with the steam building, a 3-story building of 23,300 square feet. We go through the abatement, which is really on the rectory or the house that's there currently. That would have to be abated prior to demolition. And then the new steam addition could start being constructed. The music wing, again, 8,200 square foot addition and renovation, 1,500 square foot renovations. And we break it down into, again, this is a summary of mechanical, electrical, fire alarm, plumbing, all the buildings, the sprinkler system. All the construction that we are planning on the new construction also includes air cooling in the space and sprinkler systems for code compliance. The locker rooms, which we talked about before, the locker rooms are a good design that Chris will go over after my presentation, actually. But it shows where what we're trying to do is support a 2-story building over your existing locker room. So what's going to happen is we have to empty the locker room and gut it, really, and then go through the roof to put the supports to carry the 2 stories above. And again, that's mainly to get the connection from the church building into the main building. And then the student commons, which is right next to the music area. So, I can go into a lot of detail on this. This is going to be in the 7-8 building as we get into the new bus loop and parking, breaking that down into what the bus loop is, the parking, the storm sewers, sidewalks, exterior lighting, the play areas, so site clearing, storm sewers, asphalt, the turf field, general construction. We start breaking it down into the general classrooms because they're at one cost, and then we have the basically a little more expensive spaces, which are the tech and science STEAM spaces. The auditorium would be a separate cost out of here because auditoriums are a different price point. So it's an 8,500 square foot auditorium. When you see something like what it states in here is a 3-story, it's a 3-story height structure. It's not 3 stories for the auditorium. There is a balcony area, but it's really a 3-story height building. So that gives us, when we're labeling it like that, the intent of how high the building is or what, so the volume of this building. And it includes the theater and stage equipment, kitchen and cafeteria, 8,500 square feet. The gym, 3-story at 6,500 square feet. And the locker rooms for that at 3,300 square feet. So, and then the library, which is, library media center in there, which is a 2-story space at 2,500 square feet. I know I'm flipping through this really quick because I know it's a long presentation. I'm willing to get into the detail on this, but really don't want to spend a lot of your time tonight going through that if we don't need to, unless everybody wants to, but it gets quite involved. This would be Roosevelt, an alternative instructional space.
Can I ask a quick question? I'm sorry.
Sure.
The question, so I think do we ask questions now, or should we wait until towards the end of what you're presenting here? Is there a preference?
I think like a few clarification questions, if you have them along the way, are fine.
Yeah, it is clarification. So as you're talking about the different construction costs, I think you had said something about the breakdown of the soft costs in there.
Right.
Right. So I know that there are generally allowances for things of that nature, but is there a fixed fee amount that's actually built in there for specific soft costs, like basically the fees that are paid to you all for the different things that you're doing, or is it a percentage of?
Well, right now, for budgeting purposes, we figure soft costs because this is, whether the project is large or small, the soft costs work out to about the same. It's an industry standard in New York Public Works construction in public schools. And then we use an 18% because that's about what it runs, 18% soft cost. And the soft cost, like I said, covers AE fees, CM fees, and all fees that I stated before, which are not sticks and bricks.
But if you look through the pages that you were just showing us, some are 18%, some are 21%, right?
And
there.
the other 3% on the 21% is for furniture and equipment. That I added into soft cost. And the reason why it's not on everything across the board is because when you're building roads or fields or things like that, you don't need furniture or equipment for it. So those would be at 18%. The areas that deal with the school buildings, the building itself that is going to house students and need furniture and equipment will basically carry a 3% FF&E value.
So, I mean, because I guess the question is, it's becoming greater variable costs, and not every particular space will get furnishings, right? But, you know, I guess the question is that there is a fixed cost in which the district knows exactly what those costs are versus it being a variable cost. I kind of find it a little challenging just to kind of understand how the soft costs in that with a 3% on top of that just keeps escalating with each square footage. And then the other question is, as these were calculated on up, clarification on just, you know, as you showed these individual costs, is there a cost per square foot that's pretty consistent and standard for each building type and or what you're showing up here?
Yes and no.
Okay.
On the cost per square foot. We don't do things as a straight, you know, it's a school building, it's X number of dollars a square foot. The way we look at it is we look at the design that's created, and then we figure out what the classroom cost is. When I started going over some of the areas like the auditorium and the gymnasium and the cafeteria, the kitchens, things like that, those, because of the equipment and the way they're presented, are a higher square foot cost than, say, like a general classroom. Same thing with tech rooms and science rooms. Those would be at a higher cost than a general classroom. So we break the building down into individual components, and then we got to figure, but hold on, we got to also take into account what is the structure and how is this building being structured to basically figure in at what level do we believe the cost of the overall structure is going to be, so we could factor that in at the same time. So we look at individual components. So we break this building down into its individual components, similar to when they're designing. What spaces are going to be used for science and tech, which ones have auditorium, and then we can add when you're dealing with an auditorium, you've got theatrical equipment that's going in there. That's an additional cost. The theatrical equipment is quite expensive. So we add in what a normal auditorium would cost for the equipment. So there's not a standard square foot rate across the board that we use. Our rate is based on what we're being shown as far as the design. So then we factor
then there are more assumptions that went into your general construction cost that we just don't see here. Is that a correct statement?
That would be a correct statement, yes. It's
Okay,
not,
and-
right. That
And
would be,
are those general construction costs available to us to understand how that, was that just a multiplier sort of a computation, or was there much more details that actually built up what you have here?
it's a combination of both. It's multiplier with details.
How much of it is it?
How many,
Now,
what?
how much of that is the multiplier?
Oh, I haven't figured it out like that. It's hard to put it there. Remember that what we're starting with concept drawings. So you go through, you know, at times people call them napkin sketches. We're in New York State. New York State governs of whether or not you as a school district can go ahead and design a project, fully design a project, so that you could cost it out and figure out what this project is. So the concept drawings, or the concept phase, is what is put together to budget the project. So right now, you can't legally go out and authorize, or you won't get aid on it, authorize the architects to design the project. So they'll do a concept design, of which we'll cost out that concept design. So you say, how well is that budget for the concept design? It actually works out pretty well, you know, in that we hit our numbers where we're supposed to be, because this is what we do for a living, in that we use a lot of historical data. So when I say, when I look at an auditorium, let's say, and we look at what it costs to build an auditorium, we're not just basically guessing at what that number is. We're using historic information for other auditoriums we've constructed to figure out where we expect that auditorium to be in 2000, well, this was taken off in 2003, in 2003 dollars. Then we have to factor in when are we going to build this auditorium and add in, like I said, 3% a year to the midpoint of construction, because as everybody knows, the cost of construction and everything else escalates on a yearly basis.
What it would be, understood, it would be, so I guess the question here is, if it takes you 3 years, 5 years, let's just say that to build a building, the contract is inked with you to do this, wouldn't that be, in theory, a fixed cost? So if I said, so you quoted me an estimate of X, that X in there, it's a fixed cost regardless of whatever the increases are over time.
That's
Wouldn't
correct.
Wouldn't that be, so that sounds different from what you just said.
No, it's not, but you're basically looking at this where the contractor also understands the industry also. So he's looking at the industry and he looks at the milestone schedule. So as he's looking at this and saying, okay, this building is going to be a 2-year, or 3-year, or a year build, and he'll escalate the cost, his estimate based on those costs. So, he's basically adding escalation into his numbers also. They have to, because the whole industry got caught a couple of years ago when the market really escalated and we ended up with the shortages, the supplies chain shortages. And the contractors were being forced to still maintain the contract even though they couldn't get the equipment. And the pricing on the materials was only basically locked in for 30 or 60 days at best. Well, it was very difficult, and a lot of contractors went out of business because there was no way they can basically gauge what their overall cost is. Right now, what they're doing is they're figuring out the same thing I am. They're looking at the project. Remember, I'm a GC also, and I'll look at the project from a GC's eyes. And I'll factor in, when are we going to build this? And what are the costs that the suppliers are giving me today? And I'll add an escalation factor in for when I'm actually going to secure the dollar. As soon as you award the contracts, they're trying to lock in those contracts with the suppliers. The more we can lock in, or the more they can lock in early on in the project, the better they are. But no, escalation is factored in, whether on the contractors also, because they're locking in on a lump sum price. You're right.
Okay, so then what you have is 9% then. I mean, 9% is,
3 years.
okay, so you're saying that that's not just 3 plus 3 plus 3, right? It's really 9% on the total, which means that we're saying automatically, we're going to give you 3% no matter what, and that's what's going to happen, versus saying, we'll give you 3% flat on an escalation, right? So
You're saying you want to negotiate?
No,
the
I'm just
escalation with
asking the question.
contractor?
I'm just asking the question. I just want clarification. Is it much more, we're saying to you, as the contractor, we're going to give you, each year, you're going to get 3% as part of your increase. Is that part of the assumption? I just want to make sure I understand that.
No, yes, 3% a year is what I calculate in. No, I don't cut a deal with the contractor or work any agreements out that the contractor, we're only going to give them 3%. If escalation happens like it did a number of years ago, where it was 0, and it was 0 for a number of years, which was surprising everybody in the marketplace. Everybody was eating that cost of the materials were still escalating, but the contractors and the suppliers were eating the cost. Well, if they do that, you as a district get the benefit of that, and you recoup that escalation number that we factored in. So you're not spending it. So no, I'm not. I don't know if you were saying that we're going to. Well, we can't. We can't negotiate with the contractor. It's a public bid, so it's a
No,
whole
understood.
situation.
I just want to make sure I understood what that meant exactly, that's all.
It's basically,
Yeah.
if we did not factor in escalation, we most likely would not have enough money to finish building the
So
whole
that,
project.
yeah, that's for your materials overage is what yeah.
It's
that's
just
all.
on construction costs.
Yeah, got it, okay. And then the last piece I'll ask, and anybody else wants to ask, the soft cost itself, I know you talked about that. It's a pretty big number when you sum all of these numbers up, right?
Correct.
We're talking about $44 million. in
Yep.
totality. Is any component of that fixed, or is it always variable?
At this point in the project, it's variable. It's a percentage. We know that by time we get done with this project and buying it out, it's going to be in the ballpark of 18%. So 18% is what we factor in today. When it comes down to where you're putting the project out to bid and we're locking in contracts, all of those numbers become, or most of them become fixed. So you get a fixed contract for everybody. Right now, the project, if the project varies, and you're going in, we're trying to fix that dollar today, and you increase or decrease that number, that means that we have to renegotiate that value every time you change that number. So if you lower the number, we're gonna have to renegotiate those fees. If it raises the number, you're gonna have to renegotiate that fees. That's all we'll be doing is renegotiating. The only way we can actually make this work at this point is to come up with what is an industry standard, and that is 18% is an industry standard at conceptual stage.
So, this might question be for you. This seems very important, and I'll admit it. I'm a little bit lost on the macro here. So, all the questions you're asking, which I definitely think are all important, is was to clarify where we're not being too conservative.
Yeah, I just
Is
wanted
that-
to understand, just kind of more in my layman's mind.
Okay.
So that's all.
Good. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
for me too. I was just trying to understand
just-
because I think it's important what you're asking. I just want to make sure I understood the why behind it, and I think that's what you're getting at. So that's good that I understand it. Thank you.
Okay. So going down, like I said, all of the costs for the whole project as we go through are laid out here and then further detail. And we started going through it on this, one of the meetings that we did have, and it takes a long time to go line by line, and I'm willing to do that, but I don't think today is the right venue for that.
And the whole point was to be able, because it's a significant amount of money, as opposed to just showing, a total amount of $142 million, where did that come from? It's just to give transparency to the process and how we go there. If you go back to, let's say, OHS again and coming full circle, basically, and Chris and LaDanny and I went through this whole thing, it's 19 additional classrooms. At the end of the day, it's 19 additional classrooms. You're renovating the church and rectory. You're renovating some music space, freeing up space that can be used for related services. You're creating a commons area, fitness center, lockers. I mean, pretty much in a nutshell. And we went through each one of these and actually counted the additional classrooms in each space. So, but again, people have a vision in terms of concept. I want a STEAM edition, but at the end of the day, we all know that it will be the students whose needs will drive the usage of all those facilities. Right.
If I could, to help clarify on the budget, and maybe this is just the way I look at it as an architect, the escalation is a placeholder, right? So is the soft cost. That is money that's set aside for the entire project. So the escalation is, we're budgeting a 9%. Hopefully it comes in less, that'd be great, and then the district benefits from that. Soft costs would be the same thing. There are, our fees in there, so Paul's fee, there's gonna be other consultants needed throughout the project. That 18% is a set aside that we're budgeting to cover all the soft costs for the project. I don't know if that helps, clarify that a little bit.
And if we do come in under, whether it's for soft costs or the escalation of contingency, what can be done with that money?
That's your decision. It
Yeah.
gets brought back to you on what you want to do with the under budget or the unspent.
And again, if I can add, if it goes over budget, you have to do value engineering. You have to go through and decide what you can't, because you don't have authority to spend over what the voters approved.
Right, so what we do, and to protect that, what we do is we do 3 levels of drawings. As the architects are designing, we're costing out the project. So every time we see a blip go in that it's looking like it's coming up over budget, we then sit down with them and start looking at what do we change here, what materials can we change, what design needs to be changed. This discussion is ongoing all the time so that we can basically, when we have the construction documents complete and we put it on the street to build, We actually know we could build the project because we have an awardable project based on the budget.
That was kind of a question that I was gonna ask, because I believe if we go under budget, we can take that excess and put it in our capital reserve for future projects, or can we not, or can we just, apply it to a potential tax levy, increase, to mitigate that down the road, but if we come in, over budget, like, that's more, obviously, kind of catastrophic situation. It sounds like we would have to
Well-
rebuild the plane while we're flying it at that point.
Well, yes, but, no, not really. We're not rebuilding it while we're flying it. As we're building the plane, we're basically controlling the cost.
Right.
That's what the idea is, if we wait until they finish designing the whole project, and then we figure out what that costs, then I would say you're right, is that's a problem, because then the amount of work it takes to basically bring that back into budget is enormous. So this way, as we do multiple estimates and budgeting at the same time the design's going on, it controls the budget so we know where the costs are going when we put it out to bid. So it's 3 levels of very detailed estimating to go in. Every nut and bolt that goes into a building is accounted for in those estimates. So it builds off of what we have now. Remember,
And your estimate that finally go out to bid, that project is approved by SED. That plan is approved by SED. All of those iterations are being approved and have been approved by SED.
Correct.
We actually cannot go out to bid until we have SED approval. If we go out to bid before that date, the project is unaidable. So as they're working through, as CPL is working through the plans, Paul is working in conjunction with them and the district, the whole team, to get to the number that we need to get to. Because the last thing we want to do, and it won't happen, because we don't have to, just because the bidders come back with a number and we know it's over the amount we can borrow, then we have to go back into the drawing board, but we don't want to be in that position, obviously. So we build in contingencies and estimates, conservative estimates, in order to not be in that place. So there's a very long, especially a project of this size, that involves many hands and very careful thoughts about being conservative in a variety of ways. And that's so important as to why we have to be conservative. And I've worked with, did I work with both of you? No, not you. I worked with Paul in the bond previously, and that's exactly what he did. And we came in on time and within budget. So there's many protections. We will never approve a bid that we know is over budget. And once we approve a bid, then and we award the bid, he starts to provide us and fiscal advisors with a schedule as to when we borrow. If you look at the most recent schedule that's been provided by fiscal advisors, we're not borrowing 100% of the funds right away. We're not even borrowing in a permanent way. We're borrowing in a temporary way. It's called a budget anticipation or revenue, a bond anticipation note. So it's not a full-scale bond. So everything is built in a way, so either we don't borrow as much, that's the other thing, but if we happen to borrow and we wound up borrowing, if we happen to borrow the 256 minus the 17 million that we need, then there are rules related to what we can do with that money, and I believe one of them is paying down the debt. So we can revisit that after I speak to the attorneys. But we have the ability to go up to 256 million as long as it's within the scope of the proposition that the voters approved. Or we don't borrow as much, but if we did borrow, I think there's strict rules as to where that money goes. If it's not within the scope of the project that the voters authorized.
Just a quick question, Alita. And as you mentioned that, is if you get a facility for 256, and you use, 240, okay, of that, or 230 of that, is the interest accruing on the 250, the full 256, or is the interest accruing on the 230?
It depends on what we borrow.
So the way the borrowing structure would occur would be for the anticipated costs as they come in.
So the total?
No. So your cost would, in this scenario, you're assuming the cost would be 240, right?
Yeah.
You came in under the 250. So we would only borrow up to the 240. If it was approved, there would be legal authority to borrow an additional, 15 million in this case. But we wouldn't do that until we knew either there was another project the district wanted to complete for that 15 million or a use for that money. So the way that the borrowing would occur would be.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Oh.
They're trying to tell you, you need to talk to through a microphone.
Sorry, yeah. I normally don't get
She's
told
like
that.
waving at me across the room. I was like, who's she waving at?
So you would only, short answer to your question, you would borrow the 240.
And your
then-
interest would only be on the 240?
Correct. And actually, yes, correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's variables in here, but the bottom line is variables in here intended to kind of put those variables in there as a means to protect us from any kind of spikes or variations and things that we could potentially anticipate. That is the bottom line to that. And then one last thing on this, 'cause I know we're about to go into the traffic study, and I think there was mention of aidability. Is there something that was factored in to each of those different lines that says, this is aidable at this rate, that is aidable at this rate, and so forth and so on? So it's very clear as to what it is, because when you look at it in a total nut, at the top level, it doesn't look like 60 some odd cents reimbursable or aidable. It looks much significantly less than that. So there must be, and I'm sure there are things that we just need to clarify. This part is aidable, but maybe these soft costs are not. I don't know what it is, right?
Yeah, I'll let John speak to this. He's, with fiscal, he's really our state aid expert. Let him speak to this a little more.
So the way that we estimate aid on any project is we go through the scope line by line and determine what is eligible for aid versus what is not. In this project, it's a little bit more complicated because there is the new building and there are significant addition work at particular buildings. And SED determines the aid on those portions of the project differently than they do on reconstruction of an existing building. So what we have to do is we have to go through and look to see what is actually being constructed for the new building and the additions in terms of additional educational space. And then there's a formula that SED uses to determine how much aid on those particular spaces will be generated based on what's being constructed. So when we do that, we go through and we look at each individual class, how many classrooms are being built. As Mary mentioned, for example, there's 19 additional educational spaces at the high school. So we use SED's formula to determine how much of those addition costs and the new building costs are eligible for aid. And based on that, we are assuming that about half of the new building costs will be eligible for aid, and about 40% of the addition costs are eligible for aid. Now, those numbers are conservative because we don't want to tell you you're going to get more aid than you could potentially get. All of this is predicated on SED's approval of that additional educational space. So once the project is approved by voters, we need to submit what's called a preliminary review to SED, justifying the need for these additional spaces. And that's where all the points that Mary brought up earlier, we're essentially building a case for why the district needs these additional spaces. So once they go and do their review, there's a chance that the aid on those spaces will be higher than what we're estimating because we are conservative. There's also a chance that it could be lower. And at that point, we need to examine how much lower is it? Is it still feasible to go forward with this? I don't think this is going to happen, but I would be remiss if I didn't at least bring it up as a possibility. So as we look at those spaces, we're estimating those levels of aid for those spaces. The renovation portion of all of the buildings is the aid for those is based on the maximum cost allowances of the existing buildings, which are broken up into construction cost allowances, meaning any work being done inside of the buildings, and your incidental cost allowances, which are your soft costs, as well as any site work taking place. So SED will aid up to those available maximum cost allowances for any particular school building. And using those calculations, we estimate that about 80% of the renovation costs will be eligible for aid. And again, that's a fairly conservative number, knowing that a larger portion of the work is eligible for aid. Again, we'd like to be conservative, knowing that there is a potential for incidental maximum cost allowance overages based on the site work and furniture and equipment. But at this point, we are conservative in our aid estimates.
Would it be fair to say that if we had to offer and think about potential options of what had to be dialed down and what we could focus on if we had to create alternatives, if that was the place we had to go, that you'd probably be able to look at each of those different projects and say, based upon where you would get where you'd be able to maximize your aidability, that these would probably be your highest priority projects?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
We could definitely do that.
And I assume we'll have time to go through this in more detail, looking at the charts and the columns. But yeah, my understanding, to your point, Roger, the percentage of the entire project, which is 378 million, right? Because you got 233 in principal, 144 in interest. The chunk that you've calculated that we're going to get for that 378 share, budget appropriation, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to make sure we're going to go through that because I think that's a really
Interest
important-
is aidable.
It might be, but the net
It
here
is,
calculation.
it is.
Okay,
We
but
said that.
Yes, but the total aid is 33% net on the project of 378. That's what the state, so 66% is coming from other pieces, but 33% net is where the state will kick in. Even if a building's aidable at 80, a building's aidable at 50, a building's aidable at 60. I just want to make sure, I think I've got that right, but I think we can put up charts and look at it later.
So there is a further, on the interest is aidable, and further conservative approach to our budgeting and how we do our debt schedules. Interest is aidable, the most recent state assumed interest rate, so what they calculate, say you can borrow at this rate is 3.5.
Use the microphone, sorry.
Sorry. What they say, the state does a calculation using historical values of borrowing that they deem districts can borrow at a 3.5%. That's the most recent state assumed interest rate. So they will aid borrowing at 3.5%. In our estimate, we don't estimate that the district can borrow at 3.5% as a conservative measure. We estimate a 4% interest rate right now again. So there's a gap there. We use this 50 basis point gap pretty regularly. When that state assumed rate was lower and interest rates were rising, we were forced to use a higher gap there. Hopefully, we're on the other end, where a district could borrow for lower than 3.5%, and that state assumed rate will change, but would hang higher for a little bit of time. However, there's also that gap there, so that could contribute to our estimates not working out to a clean cookie cutter percentage of why it's not you're building a ratio or whatever that percentage may be. So that's another conservative estimate
I'm
area
sorry,
as well.
can we just wrap this up so we can just go circle back?
Yeah.
I need you to make a statement to summarize that the 0.5%, 0.56% over the 5 years, right, every year,
Correct.
cumulative to 2.65, includes interest, it includes the state aid estimates,
Correct.
it includes the capital reserve, it's all in there, right?
Correct.
So it's 387 or 376.
Which number are you speaking of? The total?
The interest and the cost of the project, 376 all in, includes the projection for the state aid, the 17.3 million in capital, the 5.4 million every year, up until we need to pay back and use that money for the interest and principal payments. That 0.56% every year includes all of that.
All, yes, correct. That all is cooked into our projection to crank out the 0.56% increase.
Right, so when we take that 2.78, which is a 0.65 times
Yeah.
5, you're saying in year, I don't know, 2042, when there's a budget appropriation line of 5.4 million, which there is for 30 years, what you're saying is that has already been covered off by the 2.78, that in year 2042, we won't need to allocate in the budget. We'll have to show it as a line item, but we're saying it's already paid for by the 2.78, which we're going to get from the first 5 years.
Correct. Those increases, then it's level throughout, so there's no additional increases that are needed due to the structuring of the financing in the bond.
Right, and I think that's the really key statement here, because when you look at the chart, it looks like you've got this cost, and then you've got cost for 30 years, but what you're saying is the 2.78 will cover everything, assuming the calculations are correct, the state doesn't do anything funky.
Are we referring to the bond schedule?
I'm referring to this thing here.
Is that the
This called
bond schedule? Does that say bond schedule, do you know?
That was a breakdown of the financing costs that we presented at the online virtual financing.
Or was that the bond schedule? I can't see it, I'm sorry.
It has the numbers from the bond schedule.
So
on it,
it's
yes.
year by year?
Correct.
So it's a borrowing every year, and how much we're borrowing, and the interest payment is at the end?
Correct.
So that's the bond schedule?
Correct.
Okay, so I don't understand what the question is.
Well, the question is, I'm trying to get at to make the community can understand that the 278 will cover off all 30 years. That when there's a projected local share column of pick a year, 2036, it looks like 3.071 million. That's a local share. That's not going to come up to have to be paid by the community or in a budget that year. It's already covered off in the 278 that we've done 15 years before.
Correct. Yes, that's definitely, we work to avoid that in any of our financings, to have a payment 10 years, 20 years down the line where there's an offset of state aid and financing so that there's an increase in payment there. Yes, that is what we work, our job for districts is to eliminate that and make sure that does not happen.
So as
Correct.
Lita just indicated, 278 covers everything. As they say, the whole McGill covers principal, the interest, the construction cost, and then that should cover it for the.
And the, the lower estimated state aid.
Okay.
Right. But it's a good exercise to talk through that and go back to it, to have, because that's a complicated concept for people to understand. So the points that you made tonight are important for people to hear. So going back to the original payment structure of how this was put together, it's only the first 5 years. It actually could be lower if you get more state aid, because things were, but anyway, that it just levels off after the first 5 years, so there's no additional increase. Right.
Just, on that loop, on the road that we're proposing, that's being proposed to go out to Stormy Town, is that aidable too?
We need to connect it to.
Great question. It's a
We
great
need to
question.
connect it to
Yes.
a building, which will not be a problem.
Yes, yes, it is
Yeah.
aidable as,
Even if we decide to do it not as the bond, but do it on our
Yes.
own, that's still aidable?
Yeah.
yep.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Yes. Okay. So the next part of it was, I mean, we can skip through it. I know I just thought Chris Ladani and Chris Colby could just go through some like conceptual designs. We heard Paul give a very detailed with numbers, but these are just what it looks like for everybody. Just
Yeah,
a
don't
brief
skip through it.
overview.
I want to hear this part.
Good, okay. And they're nice pictures, they're great pictures, so thank you.
I know everybody wants to get to the traffic study. Never in my career did I think that I'd be pressured because a traffic engineer was coming up behind me. Okay, so I'm going to start at the high school. A lot of what we're going to talk about, I know most of us have already discussed, but it is important. It is the scope of the project that the students are going to live in and the teacher's going to work in. So it is really the meat and potatoes of why this project is happening. And many of the spaces that I'm going to go through and discuss, Mary did a great job of explaining why these spaces are needed. Most of the spaces we're talking about are that are either an addition or receiving renovation really boils down to, you know, the functionality of the space currently, either overutilized, in some cases out of date. So these are really needed spaces for various reasons. So I'm going to start in the middle here. On my screen, it's looks purple. That's the student commons here at the high school. We're looking to take that space and make it a usable space in essentially the middle of the high school that can be used for students to gather, but as well as a space that they can have another opportunity to grab food. The cafeteria currently holds approximately 300 students, which is way, way too small for this building. So the student commons gives another opportunity for lunch space as well as gathering space, kind of gives it a collegiate feel, which would help many of the students be prepared for their next phase in life going to college. Next to that in light pink is a two-story addition. This space is for music, would include band, orchestra, digital art, digital music, things like that. This space would be adjacent to the auditorium, which is a great adjacency for this program that is currently, you know, really underserved with the spaces that they have there from a volume of space perspective that is really needed for students in those programs. Moving over to the right in the light blue, we have the locker rooms that Paul mentioned before. This phase of the project is something that would be done as a renovation. We'd be gutting those spaces, bringing them up to code from a ADA perspective as well as a ventilation perspective. Finishes are definitely outdated in that space, but this also gives us the opportunity to build the structure that is needed, as Paul mentioned earlier, for the second and third floors and the bridge that will connect the church space, the theater space, to the high school. Speaking of which, here you see the pink and the orange. The pink is the existing church space that was acquired by the district recently. That will become a theater space, theater and dance, practice rooms. And then just to the top of that, where the rectory currently exists, would be a addition which would hold a varying degree of classroom spaces that can be used for a multitude of programs. Moving on to the second floor, so you see the student commons in the center. That's essentially a three-story space, atrium type space, so that's common through all these slides here. Just above the locker rooms, we're proposing a new fitness center. As many of you are aware, the fitness center in the high school is in a really not an appropriate space for a fitness center in terms of location and size and ventilation and whatnot. So that would be solved by moving the fitness center here, which would be adjacent to the gym and overlooking the gym space. And then the second floor of the theater space, there would be balcony seating, so that would look down into that black box sort of theater. And then again, the addition for the STEM, originally proposed as a STEM space, but really part of those 19 additional classrooms would be constructed on the second floor here. This is where the STEM addition and the theater would connect to the existing high school space via a bridge. And then moving on to the third floor, just rounding this out, student commons again, and then additional classrooms over the fitness center, as well as the third floor of that addition that would be part of those 19 classrooms for much needed program space. And then real quick, this is a section that we took through the theater, as well as that proposed STEM addition that would have those classrooms. And you can kind of get an idea of volume here in some of the programs: theater, dance in the center, balcony spaces over to the top left and right, some office and some auxiliary spaces, and then classrooms in the addition. This slide, I think we've shown this before, but these are just some examples of what potentially that atrium student common space could look like. They're really precedent images. These are not the exact design that will be vetted out later on, but it can gives you an idea of what the possibilities are for that space and the students, so that they can gather and also have an additional space for lunch and grabbing food. So moving on to this campus, we'll review really AMD and the 7-8 building. So this is a conceptual proposed site plan. On here we're showing the new 7-8 building. This is the building we're in right now, AMD. And then the auxiliary fields, tennis courts, play area, and multi-purpose field as a concept that we have planned in the budget. As part of this, we'll talk a little bit more in a minute about the proposed driveway that would connect to Stormytown. Since we have the traffic data from the traffic study, we've made some minor changes to the parking lot layout and this driveway layout. Not drastically, but just because we're more informed now. But that would be the essential layout of this campus.
Could that, since you're just on that slide.
Sure.
Could that particular, like the tennis courts, I don't know if you've seen like over like at Manhattanville College, they have like it's like a multi-purpose, but it's like a covered, almost like an inflated dome. I don't know what you call that.
Sure, yeah.
Could that be something that takes the place of, that could be like what could work for like tennis courts and making that multi-purpose with tennis courts versus having a separate multi-purpose? Is that something that's possible to do?
Not sure I follow the question.
So instead of having a separate multi-purpose court up at the top there, in the diagram, you made where the tennis courts are that you have laid out there, could that be just one multi-purpose inclusive of tennis courts? Is that a possibility to do?
Meaning the field be covered as well as the tennis court? This is a multi-purpose field.
No, just one multi-purpose field. That's with that would also include tennis courts.
So are you
I
asking,
see,
like,
I
instead of just tennis courts, we can put a bubble over it and it can be converted from tennis courts to like
Yes.
indoor soccer to
Yes.
indoor lacrosse,
I
like
see.
multi-purpose?
Yes.
Anything is possible with the right amount of money.
Now, I guess would it be a swap to do one to create the other?
I don't think so.
So,
That would be a bigger cost, but
so the way SCD would view that, it would most likely be considered its own building, something, they would call it something like a field house, which would not be eligible for building aid.
Right, and an air structure, an air source structure, it's not an inexpensive structure. It also is a high maintenance cost because that has to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year.
But
So
we can,
we normally don't recommend them for schools.
but if you include a tennis court as part of your PE instructional program, it's an outdoor, more or less, classroom because there is a tennis unit in PE. It's not just for extra and co-curricular activities.
Right. At the very best, absolute best case scenario, SED may grant that what's called a teaching station, so one phys ed teaching station.
Right.
That's with the covering, is what we'd say.
Right, which would be significantly less than what it actually costs to build.
Okay, so it would be cheaper to maintain it if it was like built and covered, than you're saying, than if you had that inflated dome that could be used, I mean, there's a Club Fit that has one, there's a, Manhattanville College, and I'm not saying that that's the right solution, I'm just suggesting having something that's multi-purpose and one single thing versus building out the multi-purpose separately that's going to be just used for when the weather's warm, which is only a few months, and then the tennis courts, which will be used for a few months. We don't have anything covered that can be used all year round. Could that be much more purposeful so that this way sports can have continuity within that same multi-purpose space?
We could sort of look into that, but remember that the tennis court space right now is only about 25% of the field.
It's not about the
footprint.
percentage of the field, it's the usage of the actual
Right,
space.
but when you start looking at that, it would be how many occupants can it handle? Basically, the larger the structure gets, the more expensive the structure gets.
Meaning a footprint of a tennis court is not the same footprint of a soccer field or footprint of like a lacrosse field, is that what you're
That's
saying?
correct,
Okay.
yes. 4 tennis courts would be about 25% of the soccer field.
I'm just thinking in terms of year-round use, right? Because, in the wintertime, our kids need a place to essentially, whether it's gym or whether it's after-school sports, as I look at that, I think to myself, wow, we're going to build 2 separate field spaces that can only realistically be used in the warmer weather months. You don't want them out when it's like 20 degrees outside, and our winters seem to be longer, not shorter. So what is realistic up there, and what that you get the best bang for your buck? Because if you're only going to use those tennis courts in late April, May, and then June, then you've got and maybe in September and October and part of November, and you've got like a good chunk of time where it's not being used. And then is that a good use of funds there, or do we just create one year-round multi-purpose for everything, right?
So if I can add just a little bit, because I've actually had a good deal of experience over those 2 topics. So you turfed a field, let's if you just left the field grass. The fact that like a day like today, it's frozen, you actually get more use out of a field throughout the winter, and depending upon the type of fill you put in it, it can melt faster as well. So we have discovered when I was in Pleasantville, the use of a turf field gave me more access for recreational time at lunch and more time for my sports program than a grass field. We basically used it almost every single month out of the school year. The other thing was that the tennis court fields, again, the tennis courts became part of a PE unit, and we had Chris reach out to neighboring schools. They use it in the fall, September, October, even into November, depending upon the weather. This year you could have done that. And again, it starts up again. Interscholastic sports starts in March here in New York. So you got March, April, May, and then June that you can use it. So you will get a more use out of the field, Roger, than you think you will,
No,
and then the tennis courts.
I get it. I'm just thinking in terms of much greater utilization of it during the cold winter months, even for there to be opportunities for intramural types of sports or something like that, right? I just want to, I'm thinking about this, right? Like, what could we do that could make this a 2-into-1 sort of a situation? I don't know. I mean, there's something to think about.
One of the things you got to keep in mind as you go through, and when Chris goes through the building here, is you have another gym space built into this program. So you're increasing actual indoor gym space.
Sure.
That's at the 7-8 building.
Oh, right, okay, sorry. I'm with you.
All right, so to Paul's point, we'll look at the floor plan here now. The bottom of this, probably hard to see, but the bottom of this slide is where the roads and parking will be. And then on the back side will be where we were just talking about the fields. So the top of the page is the back. This is really split into what I like to call public and private spaces, where the classrooms would be more or less your private spaces, and then on the front side of the building would be your public spaces, such as auditorium, cafeteria, gymnasium, etc. And that allows a few things to happen. It gives the students the opportunity to have a much better educational setting, looking out over the fields as opposed to looking out over parking lots. And then it allows us to be able to sectionalize the building when there's after-hour sporting events or things going on in the auditorium, for example. So we're able to have much better control over the building from a security standpoint and functionality standpoint after hours. Gymnasium, to Paul's point, this is a full-size gymnasium, bigger than really what you're going to have currently at the high school, so that could be used for some, off-season type sports. And then this pattern really follows up to the second and third floor. So classrooms on the back side and those larger box spaces on the front side of the building, including music and science and the library, all the way up through to the third floor.
And Chris, if I can just add to that, just to give people, again, some numbers to think about, because Chris Ladani and we went through this. There are 32 general education classrooms in that, 12 special program classes, meaning for art, music, CTE, and tech, 25 special education and related services classrooms, and then, of course, we've got the gym, the library, the cafeteria, the auditorium, the nurse, guidance, et cetera, office, and faculty room. So a comprehensive 3-story building.
And then just looking at that from a sectional perspective, you get an idea of the volume of spaces here. Auditorium on the left, some of the science labs there in the center, in the yellow color, library in the middle, main entrance, vocational classrooms, some STEAM classrooms, and the gymnasium on the far right side. Moving along to Brookside. So on Brookside, we have a few things going on here. First, the much needed additional classroom space. This project is currently under design right now. This is not part of the bond project, it's part of the capital project, so that wheels are already in motion on this project, which is going to give a new STEAM classroom and 5 additional general ed classroom spaces, bathrooms, and some support spaces. As part of the bond, we're looking at renovations to the cafeteria, as well as a gymnasium auditorium expansion along the back. This will help with, the addition, the classroom addition is going to help with the needed classroom space. The gym and the cafeteria renovations are going to help with getting students, the cafeteria space that they need, and then getting students off of that stage that's currently used for a multitude of activities that really aren't stage activities right now, and then give us the additional gymnasium and auditorium space that's needed here along the back of the building. That was the first floor you're seeing because of the topography on this site, the basement floor plan, if you will. Up below the gymnasium addition that we're proposing would be a covered play space, and then on the bottom floor, below the classroom space, we have right now what we're calling storage, but could be additional classroom space in the future. And then moving on to Claremont, there's a few key things again here, overutilized spaces that really revolve around the cafeteria and the music program. We're looking to take over the stage space and get really what's music out of the stage and the little side room that's next to the stage, and give the students actual music classrooms just behind where the stage exists now. We're also looking at taking 2 additional classrooms that are on the bottom side of this plan near the main entrance and converting that into cafeteria space and a new servery, which this kitchen and servery line is, significantly backed up during lunchtime. And then we're proposing a 6-classroom addition with 2 additional classrooms proposed just for future planning. We're showing 8 here, but there's really 6 as part of this project. To recoup the spaces we're taking for music and that we took as part of the cafeteria, and providing some additional classrooms for the needed student population in this building. And then on the basement level, below the proposed addition, we're going to have an alternative fitness space. Kind of acts as an auxiliary gymnasium in this building. The amount of students in this building really warrants another fitness space. The current gym that's there cannot handle, when you look at the calculations, cannot handle all the students in one gymnasium space. And then without further ado, unless there's questions, we'll talk about the traffic study.
All right, I've been told this is what people are interested in talking about. Unusual for me. I do a lot of traffic analysis. Dave Hastings with CPL. I'm a licensed engineer, certified professional traffic operations engineer. I've been doing traffic studies, transportation design. That's what I do with CPL. So I was brought onto this project to analyze the project as it's currently proposed, what Chris had just gone through with AMD Middle School. So for this project, we followed industry standard methodology with preparing and analyzing the traffic. So a typical traffic study, well, more specifically, this project as it relates to the process that we followed for traffic analysis on screen here. So we start with collecting the existing data at key intersections that we had identified around the school. We wanted to look at the area around the school and also the adjacent road network. As part of the study, we're going to be getting into impacts of adjacent intersections. For the school, we wanted to identify and isolate school-related traffic volumes. We wanted to establish the existing baseline traffic conditions. That's existing traffic and traffic that isn't school-related. We want to identify and isolate what the existing traffic levels are. We wanted to then get into estimating the additional traffic volumes that are expected from adding in the additional school and the additional students, model and evaluate the existing conditions as they are today, and then we want to model and evaluate the proposed conditions. Doing that allows us to compare the proposed conditions to the existing conditions so we can determine the level of impacts based on the traffic conditions. Study area. We analyzed, we collected intersection turning movement counts at 12 locations around the school, looking ahead to the proposed conditions that we were going to be evaluating. Coming into this traffic study, one of the big impacts that we wanted to look at was the potential addition of a driveway access connection to Stormytown Road. So we wanted to collect data at key intersections related to the Stormytown Road access, and these are the intersections that allowed us to collect those data. This is a sample of some of the data that we collected. I could probably spend 3 hours talking about all the nerdy engineering and math that went into this, but this is just a snippet. We had 24 hours of traffic data collection for 3 days straight at these 2 locations. On Van Cortlandt Ave, just south of the Claremont Elementary driveway, which is the closest point up Van Cortlandt Ave before you reach the first school driveway. So this gives us a snapshot of all school-related traffic with a minimal amount of background traffic. We're far enough up Van Cortlandt Ave that it eliminates a lot of the residential units that are further down Van Cortlandt. Similarly, on Claremont Road, we collected 24 hours a day, 3 days straight of traffic just east of the easternmost Claremont driveway. So interesting thing about this data is we knew that there was separated starting and ending times for both the middle school and the elementary school. And this helps validate the data, the quality of it that we were getting. Over the course of the morning and the afternoon, we saw the peaks that were related to the separated starting and ending times. Interesting thing about this data, Van Cortlandt Ave has about 3,300 vehicles a day moving up and down Van Cortlandt Ave. Claremont Road is 678. So another thing that told us is the majority of the school-related traffic is using Van Cortlandt Ave. Some portion of it is using Claremont, but we're really focused on Van Cortlandt Ave with our analysis. As part of the traffic data that we collected, it breaks out the classification of vehicles that are passing over the data collection points. It isolates school bus traffic, so we were able to get a volume of school bus traffic that is passing over our data collection points. This is both AMD and Claremont related traffic and bus traffic. So this isn't necessarily something that we analyze as part of our data, but we did extract the school bus traffic volumes to provide that information for anybody that was curious on it. We also use the volume of traffic the volume of school bus traffic as we were analyzing our traffic models. We know how many passenger vehicles, we know how many heavier school bus vehicles are coming through. We also know how many delivery trucks, single unit trucks are coming up and making deliveries to the school. So as we were analyzing our traffic, we were factoring that in. Last piece of data that we had collected was 24 hours a day, 3 days straight of traffic data on Stormytown Road near the location where the connection, the proposed driveway connection is to be located. So this told us the volume of traffic that's passing by that location, northbound, southbound, individually. It tells us the percentage of heavy traffic that's using it, which is not a large percentage. This is a very standard percentage. You know, it's delivery trucks, Amazon vehicles passing through. We weren't seeing any large volumes of tractor trailers or pass-through traffic. We found the speed, the observed speeds on that section of the roadway, which we didn't put the data collection on the bend. We put it kind of in between the bend on Stormytown Road and the next intersection, so it was a straightaway, so that we could get accurate speed data collection. And the speeds are within normal for a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit on a roadway. So we weren't finding that traffic was zooming through the area. This was pretty standard speeds for traffic. Projected conditions. So with the turning movement data that we had collected, this is a little snapshot on the left there of the intersections near the school that we collected traffic data. So what this allows us is, we had it collected during the morning period and the evening period. We had it collected for 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon. And that allowed us to identify within that 3-hour window what is the highest 1 hour of traffic volumes that are passing through the area. As we're doing our analysis, that highest 1 hour is what we use for analysis. So when we're setting up models, we're using 1 hour of traffic data. So we were able to isolate the amount of traffic that's entering and exiting the AMD middle school. As highlighted in the colors, these are the numbers that we had identified and correlated with the existing school-related traffic. So the things that we know are how much traffic is coming in and out, and we know how many students are at the school. So what we could do is calculate a rate of traffic per student, and that tells us how many vehicles are coming in and out per student. So then we can extrapolate to the expansion of the school. The new students that are getting moved over, we know how many new students are moving over. So we take that rate that we had calculated for the existing students, apply that to the number of incoming students, and that's the amount that we increase the traffic by. So the numbers at the bottom are what we used for the proposed conditions for school-related traffic. Getting into some of the details, I could go a lot deeper into this, but I'll kind of hit the highlights here. We took the data as it was. We estimated the directions that traffic was entering and exiting the school in the adjacent road network. We isolated the background traffic. We used a future growth rate for background traffic, assuming there's going to be a moderate increase in traffic over time, over the next couple of years before the school is constructed. So we essentially analyzed 3 conditions that we compared to each other to determine the impacts of the proposed project. So we started with the no build condition, which is essentially existing conditions as they are today. No project, it's just the existing traffic volumes, existing school network. That gives us a baseline of comparison. Any project that's going to come in, we have today's conditions that we can compare them to. We went from there and we, excuse me, we wanted to get into the, we wanted to look at what if we built the school, but we did not do the driveway connection to Stormingtown Road. This will tell us intuitively, we know that conditions will get worse, but how worse? So this gives us an opportunity to really determine the scale of how much worse the traffic can get if there is no other changes to the road network. And then from there, we did the build condition, but with the driveway connection to Stormingtown Road. So we assumed that based on the adjacent road network, estimating the behavior, the travel patterns as they are, the traffic data that we had collected, our best judgment on what direction people would be coming and going from and utilizing the new road network. So we assumed 40% of traffic would opt to use the new driveway connection to Stormingtown Road, and the remaining would continue accessing the school through Van Cortlandt Ave.
Oh, I have a quick clarifying question.
Yeah.
How did you come to assume that 40% would be using the new potential egress and 60% wouldn't?
Yeah, it's largely engineering judgment, but based on the existing conditions, we know how much traffic is coming in and out of the school. As it is, all traffic needs to funnel up and down Van Cortlandt Ave. So at Van Cortlandt Ave, we can take the data from Van Cortlandt Ave and the other intersections on Route 9, and with a reasonable level of confidence when we can determine what direction they're coming from.
Right, so you can look and say, okay, these cars are coming and they're coming on Route 9 and then they're going up to Stormytown Road already anyways, and like 40% of them are doing some variation of that.
Exactly.
So
if traffic is coming from the north, we can make a reasonable assumption they might choose to turn left and go up Stormytown Road and use the driveway up there. Building a driveway on Stormytown Road also allows access from the Parkway, which
Right.
currently all traffic accessing the school needs to make their way to Route 9 and access on Van Cortlandt. So we kind of just took an opportunity to zoom out and look at Ossining as a whole, the limits of the town, the school district, where would traffic be coming from, and we use our best engineering judgment to determine if there is another option for a route to get to school, they might go this way. And there's existing technology to help us determine some of that. I just hit the point in Google Maps on Stormytown Road, hit Google directions from the southeast corner of the town. If you were doing Google directions, what direction would it tell you to take? And portions of the town where we were finding that even Google would tell you to come up and take a different direction than navigating over to Van Cortlandt, we kind of broke out the percentage based on how much traffic we might expect to use the new driveway. So that's what went into determining approximately 40% would use the Stormingtown driveway if it was available.
What is your assumption on the actual driveway itself? Do you assume a 24/7 open access way to go from Van Cortlandt through the proposed driveway to Stormytown? Do you assume a 9 to 5 access or school hours access? What's your assumption on there? Do you assume 1 lane, 2 lanes, coming, going? Do you assume 3 lanes? What's the assumption in that?
Sure. Can I take 1 second? I like
Yeah,
to eat
sure,
a
sure.
bottle of water.
Yeah.
It's been a long day. answer time. So for the traffic analysis, we're really focused on the peak hour of morning traffic and the peak hour of afternoon traffic. So over the course of a 24-hour day, that's really beyond the scope of what the traffic study is analyzing. I'm really looking at the traffic volumes that are in and out. If the school chose to limit the access time of the driveway to when school is not in session, it wouldn't change the results of the traffic study.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. So do you have a recommendation towards something on this so far?
So one of the ways that the traffic study sort of helps in decision making is it's kind of limited in how it helps with some of the decision making. This is looking at the peak hours of when school is in session. So the traffic analysis is really looking at like when school is in session. Decisions on access when the road wouldn't be used is really beyond the traffic study because there's no traffic on the road. It would be in discussions with the town and the village and the school, emergency services as to what they hope to see with the usage of the road.
But, okay, fair enough. But in terms of, because you have there the build condition, I think, if I'm misunderstanding it, tell me.
Sure.
The build condition, meaning take take Van Cortlandt all the way up to Stormytown Road, right? That seems like that's what that middle one is that correct?
Actually, yeah, I will correct you there. So the Van Cortlandt access would remain as it is. Van Cortlandt would end in the cul-de-sac.
Where Van Cortlandt is.
Yep. So the driveways, so the access to Stormytown is a driveway for the school. It's not a thoroughfare road.
Got it.
That's what we were analyzing as part of this. Could you build a thoroughfare road? It is a possibility. For the traffic study, we just looked at it as a driveway. So the only vehicles using the Stormytown driveway are school-related traffic. We didn't take any of the background traffic and route it through because the preference would be to discourage that.
Got it. Fair enough. Thank you.
So these are the three conditions. So we modeled these in industry standard software. We have a software called Synchro. We take the traffic volumes, the various conditions, speeds, the geometry of the roadway. We can enter all this information in. The software analyzes the standard road network with through volumes and determines levels of service. So I understand this table is probably difficult to read. It is in the report that I had prepared. I know at first glance you've received the PDF of the report and it's 120-ish pages. The first 35 of them are the traffic study. The remainder 100 or so is all of our backup materials, the raw data collection, the outputs of the report. The earlier portion of the report is where we summarize all of that information in a much more easy to understand format. This table is in Appendix B. So I'll just break down really quick what we're looking at here. So when we do the traffic modeling, it's using the software to determine the level of service and delay of the approaches and the intersection as a whole. All of the intersections that we have included in the data collection, we included in the model. So the cliff notes of what we're looking at with the results, our interpretation of the final results. We were finding that those first four intersections on Route 9, we found that the build condition with the new driveway improves the levels of service at the intersections on Route 9, which was an interesting conclusion. Building the driveway access on Stormytown Road actually allows an opportunity for traffic to access the school without having to get on Route 9. So we were finding that the levels of service, at the intersections on Route 9 with the new driveway connection actually improved to a level that was noticeable in the results. I mean, yeah, there's some intersections that the existing level of service and the proposed level of service are about the same. The traffic volumes are low enough that additional increases or decreases in traffic don't have a significant impact.
Does that assume, though, that the traffic coming from Stormytown would come into the school and then go back out through Stormy Town and not come into down Van Cortlandt? Or do you not assess the actual flow? You're just looking at car counts?
The simplest assumption that we can make, and the easiest to keep the analysis simple, is to assume the direction that they come from is the direction that they go. There would be some volume of traffic that would come and go through, and probably also the other direction. So the simplest way to keep it simple for the analysis is to assume the direction they came from is the direction they went, unless we have a very compelling reason to do otherwise. As part of the site design, like when the project starts getting into more detailed design, they're looking at the layout of the driveways, the locations of the parking lots, parent pickups, drop-offs, bus locations. That's when things will start coming into better clarity. So at the level of the project as it is right now, I have to keep simplified assumptions for the traffic.
Yeah, no, I get that. But if we're saying that building this road is actually going to have a net positive on Route 9 intersections, to me, we should have data to back that up. And I understand your assumption is come in, come out, but you could also see people coming in, oh, I got to get to 9, I'm coming through the school down Van Cortlandt. I mean, we're saying 100% will come back that way, right? The way they came in, to arrive at the conclusion that the road will actually improve, the driveway will actually improve what's there now.
Yeah. So I could kind of break it up into like the level of impact that it has, because it's almost like a ballpark. Like how much impact would this have? Which is why we do the analysis the way that we do it. So we have the existing conditions, and then just for comparison, so that you can put things into perspective, how much of a difference does this make? We analyze the proposed conditions without a driveway connection so that we can see how much worse traffic gets on Route 9 if you don't have the driveway connection to Stormy Town Road. It's there to help put it in perspective. So then we do the last model that we have set up is the one with the driveway connection to Stormy Town Road. So that really lets you know, like, we're not just picking numbers out of thin air. We have something to compare it to. So I can tell you from the data that we have, if I changed it from 40% to 20% to 60%, any way you shake it, there's going to be a net positive for the traffic as it is.
And that includes your assumptions include the road diet on Route 9, correct?
Next one I'm getting into.
Okay.
I do have one more point I want to touch on before we move on to the road diet. So as part of the analysis, we looked at the driveway connection to Stormy Town Road. It was pretty clear, being a transportation engineer, that location adjacent to the school parcel that is on Stormy Town Road has the sharp bend in it. Site distance, just looking ahead to the engineering challenges with making a connection there. The initial model that we set up was just a easy, simple driveway connection to Stormy Town Road, maintaining through access on Stormy Town. No change to the traffic pattern on Stormy Town, just a stop-controlled driveway. We wanted to look at a what if. What if you change the driveway connection on Stormy Town Road to always stop control? Realign the geometry of the driveway connection at that location, just to give us an idea, a comparison. So if you changed it from stop control at the driveway only to always stop control, we were finding that the traffic volumes on Stormy Town Road are low enough that it didn't have a significant impact. Basically went from level of service A to added another 5 seconds of delay to traffic on Stormy Town Road, changing to level of service B.
Is that, when you say stop, you mean stop signs or
Stop
lights?
signs.
Or, okay,
Yeah.
you mean stop signs.
So other thing we were looking at on Stormy Town Road, always stop control, stop signs on all 3 legs. Just upstream and downstream on Stormy Town Road are always stop control intersections. Stormy Town Road is not free access all the way through. This wouldn't be out of character with the corridor. It would be as expected. You don't have to go very far before you approach a stop sign on Stormy Town Road anyway. So as the design develops and they get into further design, this is another thing for consideration. It'll be discussions with the town once you kind of start getting into your engineering work as it relates to the driveway. So as we were working on this, we were provided information on the road diet. There was a study that the village had commissioned that was completed in 2021. Another consultant had worked on that. I reviewed that report. It was comprehensive. It looked like they had put a lot of work into it, and easy to understand. Road diets are a very common treatment all over New York State. It was clear from the study that this was a good candidate for a road diet. That's what they concluded in the study, and as a traffic engineer, I was generally in agreement with what they had concluded. So the road diet study that they had commissioned in 2021, I had an opportunity to talk with the town, and I talked with the consultant that is currently working on this. I was able to find out from the consultant that this project is awarded. It's moving. They've received federal funds. This isn't just theoretical. This is a project that's coming through. So it was important for us to evaluate it. Talking to the consultant, the road diet project, the project on Route 9 is still in preliminary design phase, so there's a lot of unknowns. So in terms of the road diet layout, I talked to the consultant that's working on it. They're still working on like fine tuning and laying out the lane configurations and geometries, but we needed to get the traffic study completed. So in talking with them, it was appropriate to use the lane configurations that they had presented in the road diet study completed in 2021. So we used that lane configuration to model an alternative. We set up an alternative model for the intersections on Route 9. This road diet really only impacts the intersections on Route 9, so we didn't get into the rest of them because it would be the exact same results. So the table that I have up there is the results of that. So what we found when we modeled the build condition with the proposed connection, the proposed driveway connection to Stormytown Road with the road diet configuration, we found that the road diet did not have a noticeable impact. With the way that the road diet works, there's some legs of the intersection that experience a slight decrease in level of service, and other legs that experience an increase in level of service. Ultimately, it all turns out to be a wash. So, believe it or not, the results of the analysis is that the road diet condition isn't going to change the functionality and level of service of the Route 9 corridor.
Does a smart light, I don't know if that's what they're called, but that smart metered light, does that have any play into what you guys modeled?
It does not. So with the traffic model that we set up, we reached out to New York State Department of Transportation. They own and operate the traffic signals on Route 9, so the Van Cortlandt and Cedar Lane traffic signals are owned and operated by New York State DOT. So we received record plans of how they're constructed, the phasings for the signals, when the greens and yellows and reds, any turn lanes if they're there, what the phasing diagrams are, and also the signal timing. So the existing conditions are the existing signals. So the results of this traffic analysis are the existing conditions. One of my questions to the consultant that's working on the road diet study is, what is the scope of work of their project? Are they going to be making improvements to the traffic signal? That's information that we haven't received yet. They're still in the early stages of their project. I've been talking with the team. This would be an opportunity to try to work with them further to find out what their project is going to include. With the road diet project itself, I mean, from experience, inevitably, you're going to have to make some modifications to the traffic signals. I'm just not sure how many modifications they're going to be making. Are they going to be rebuilding them, replacing them? If they're taking it from 2 lanes each direction to 1 lane each direction with a center turn lane, basically as indicated on the screen there, they're going to have to change the location of the lights on the span wires. And I know New York State is looking for every opportunity to change span wires to mast arms. It's just a lot easier to maintain and safer for them. So I'm expecting there's going to be improvements to the traffic signal. We just have yet to determine exactly how many.
So can I ask a clarifying question? So when you said that this project has minimal impact, and you're saying that's based on the assumption of existing traffic lights and stuff, right? So there's a chance that if they update the lights and such, that the impact could change, right?
They could improve further.
Okay.
Yeah. A traffic signal has a major impact on the operations of the corridor. We know how the existing traffic signal operates. I'm not sure how the future traffic signal is going to operate. I would expect it to be better.
Thank you.
So from a project plan for this road, the road that goes, the driveway that goes up to Stormytown, is there I don't remember if we talked about this, a sidewalk that would also go along with it too, to Stormytown? Or is it just straight, only a road? Do we know
That is beyond the scope of the traffic study. The
It's
sidewalk.
not the traffic study, it's just part of the plan, and, you
Yep.
know, you might know.
So we've, as I mentioned before, we started looking at a new layout for the road. With that, you know, if that's something that the district would desire, we can look at it. I don't think we've really gone down that road yet.
Okay.
So I just wanted to, oh, go ahead, Frank, go ahead.
I do think that's an important point. If that changes busing for some of the neighboring communities and walking, and students that would get bus today that walk through, you know, the driveway and stuff. So I know those are all questions, but I do think we need to sort of make sure we get those ducks in a row so that people know the impacts to them.
Sure.
And the other thing first of all, this is great that this was done, and we're talking to municipality, DOT is talking to us. That's, love it, to hear public sector all connecting. That's wonderful. The other part of this, as you may be aware of, is 9A. 9A, according to I just Googled it just now, if they're on track, there's final recommendation for what they're going to do to 9A due about now, January, February. And the preliminary is they're going to take out all the lights. It's going to be a thoroughfare. They're going to put all new bridges in. And again, that's conceptual. That's
Yeah.
highly conceptual. The Stormytown piece, according to the schematic, is they're going to build a bridge over Stormytown and give you access to the northbound and the southbound and clean up the way you get on and the merging lanes and such. I think the board, and through this, should do some due diligence, even if it's a phone call at some point to DOT and say, hey, you guys got an idea of what you're going to do here? Because the shovels in the ground on that may not be for years. I think the impact could be when they're building that thing, if they do Stormytown and, for example, shut down Stormytown access completely, what does that look like when we have our our driveway through? I get it, engineer, we can't predict the future, and it's great that we're doing this due diligence, but just maybe a worth to just try to get a sense of where they may go, so at least we could say the board did the due diligence to say, okay, look, by the way, 5 years from now or 3 years from now, this thing could be a mess over there because of what they're doing, but we anticipated that, and that's just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah. New York State Department of Transportation is very amenable to communicating with the local stakeholders. They want to make sure that projects are delivered that meet the needs of the people that they serve. So the project as it is, because I did the same. I tried looking into it. I was told of a parkway project that was coming down the pipeline. And as I was looking into it, I found that I was like, this isn't really a project yet. This is just, they're basically in the very, very early study stages. The driveway connection to Stormytown Road has been identified as a priority for the school district. This isn't a should we, could we, this is a we really need to. The single access on Van Cortlandt Ave is a problem not just for traffic, but very clearly also for emergency services and all options. So the traffic study found that the need for the driveway connection to Stormytown Road is there, and it would provide a benefit at a negligible impact to the adjacent road network. The traffic volumes on Stormytown Road are low enough that it could easily accommodate additional school-related traffic volumes with no degradation to the level of service. I know there would be pushback from people that live on the road, understandable, but it would be working with the town to get approval to make the driveway connection. And then taking your point, looking further into the future, the parkway, the driveway connection to Stormytown Road is really dependent on the access to the parkway being there. Any improvements that they make to the parkway intersection with Stormytown Road would be to the benefit of the school district. Elimination of that intersection would be a problem, which is where NYSDOT, New York State DOT, would be accommodating to any needs and requests that were presented to them. So as an important stakeholder to the Parkway project, you could really advocate for improving the Stormytown Road connection to the Parkway.
Thank you. And but just to clarify, I'm not saying we should hold up our road to see what DOT may or may not do in 5, 10, 15 years. I just wanted to say that it's great that you've had some conversations with them and they're amenable to sort of hear where we're looking, and whatever they do in the crystal ball in the future should not impact what we think we need now.
Yeah, and I haven't talked to the team that's working on the study for the Parkway, but to your point, it is important to communicate with them what the school is looking at doing and how it impacts their road and their project, so that they don't lose sight of it either. So it's something that can be done. That's easy. As we work with municipalities to reach out to the village and the town and communicate with them further, it's also going to be communications with the Department of Transportation and also the consultant that's working on the Route 9. It's a streetscape project.
I have a question. You said that if we add this road, we can expect roughly 40% of the traffic to take advantage of this new pathway. So I'm going to try to phrase my question in a way that makes sense.
Sure.
So if we add that egress and an additional building, can you compare the traffic level for Van Cortlandt versus what it is now if we did nothing, no building, just current conditions?
Yes. Yeah. So we did. So we modeled the existing conditions as they are today. That's our baseline. That's our starting point. If we didn't do anything, this is the traffic that we have.
Right.
It's not good. So up by the school, we observe that there's congestion, and it's not even just traffic and levels of service. We were finding that the intersections immediately surrounding the school, the traffic models, this is where the traffic models are set up for roadways, not driveways. We were finding that there wasn't high volumes of traffic passing through these intersections, but the reality of the situation is once you pass through the intersection, there's nowhere for you to go. And that's the problem with the school campus as it is now. So it backs up onto Van Cortlandt. So we have existing traffic volumes, existing levels of service on the adjacent road network. And as part of our analysis, we use that as a comparison for the project without a driveway connection to Stormytown Road and the project with a driveway connection to Stormytown Road.
I asked because how I read it, but, I need someone to just tell me, because how I read, like you said, it was like 120 pages, so like I did my best. How I read it was that if we add this access road, even if we add another building, the traffic will be improved on that Van Cortlandt and Route 9 intersection compared to what it is today.
Hold on, let me just restate this.
Okay.
Your question back to you, make sure that we're on the same page. So the building a new building without the driveway connection to Stormytown Road, and how would traffic on Van Cortlandt be changed?
Building the building with the egress to Stormytown Road.
Yep.
Versus, like, how would that compare for Van Cortlandt and Route 9 compared to what it is right now? Like, would traffic conditions on Van Cortlandt and 9 still improve even if you add 20% more children?
Gotcha. I'm picking up what you're laying down now.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is I didn't exactly get into in this presentation, so that's good to circle back on. Building the new building and having the driveway connecting to Stormytown Road, allowing some of the additional traffic to enter in and out of Stormytown Road. How does Van Cortlandt change over that? I didn't get into that specifically, but I can. Having more children at the school, more traffic associated with it, but allowing them an alternative access to the school also improves traffic on Van Cortlandt Ave. It's a little bit challenging to pick up in the model because of how much traffic, in the existing condition, how much traffic is on Van Cortlandt Ave with nowhere to go on campus. One of the other benefits to the project that is difficult to quantify in the traffic study is how much additional space is going to be made on the campus for parking and vehicle queuing during pickup and drop-off, being able to get the traffic off of Van Cortlandt Ave. It's really difficult to quantify in the traffic study with hard numbers because that's just site circulation. So we don't know what the final plans are going to be for the school. It's a work in progress, but invariably there's going to be improvements to the campus that allows more of the traffic to get off of Van Cortlandt. So there's going to be less traffic on Van Cortlandt because there is an alternative access. There's also going to be less traffic on Van Cortlandt in general because they're not backing up onto it. They're able to be stored on campus.
And just so exactly building off of that, and I guess I'll throw this out there now because I had it for your conclusion slide, but I think maybe we're almost on to that.
I needed to go one more.
Yeah. Well, this pertains to, I think, this. So, yeah, having read through their study, to your point, you're talking about Van Cortlandt and 9 and other intersections. What was kind of out of scope, which I think there was even a note that said, naturally, adding 200 vehicles in an hour in the AM and 115 in the PM will cause significant impact to the intersections around the school. So I guess the question is, do you have to look at this holistically, say, yes, the traffic counts will improve if you add the driveway or Van Cortlandt, but someone's got to take a paper to pen and draw operationally, here's where the drop-off's going to be, here's where the buses are going to come in, blah, 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 blah. That's not part of this scope. Who does that? Because to me, that's important because that's really going to give you the picture of what Van Cortlandt would look like when we build this thing, if we do build this thing up there, that shows you the real impact. So I guess that's the key question, right? This did not take into account what's going to go on up there per se. Who does that? And how does that play into all that, what's up there as well?
Yeah, especially if cars are going to pass to go into parking lots. So I think it is part of the design. So I imagine that that's part of what you would take these results and conclusions and say, this is what we must do in order to accommodate that, to make sure that whatever percentage that we're going to relieve off of Van Cortlandt by opening up this driveway would need to look like this, whether it's a car passing lane to go into the parking lot or in a place where, because the buses are going to stay there until the time they let the kids off to go inside the school building.
Right. So that's pretty much exactly right. Even with the sidewalk question, there's a lot of site circulation that will happen. Pedestrian, parent, teacher, bus, that's all being looked at now that we have this data and that we have, if the board decides to move forward with the road, the driveway, then we can start to look at all of that, including the parking, which will help get more cars off the road as it currently exists. A lot of that we need to talk with Jared and Jim about and the district as well, but yes.
I have a question that's kind of more for general public traffic versus specifically school traffic. So just in the mornings, okay, first of all, number 12 on the LOS and delay table, I don't remember what page that is, but could we go over that? I'm
Sure.
a little bit directionally challenged, so you can explain this to me. I think of the Parkway as northbound and southbound, and you don't have southbound on there. So,
Right, yeah, it's kind of like northwest, southeast.
Yeah.
So we end up just sort of picking either north or south or east or west. Let me get back into here and figure out which one of these we chose it to be.
Okay, and then from there, going south, whatever direction that is on this sheet, that can be pretty backed up in the mornings as it is, and I see that it becomes a score of C with the egress from an A. And like, obviously that's to be expected because there is more traffic going on to Stormytown, but I think that might concern other members of the community who are already kind of delayed in the mornings getting to work. So-
Which intersection are you referring to?
The Briarcliff
The Parkway?
Parkway and Stormytown.
Yeah, the Parkway in Stormytown is an interesting intersection, challenging to model well. So we had to use some observational data with it. So the levels of service that are in here, we had 3 hours of turning movement data collected in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon. What it does is we hire somebody, they go out, they set up a camera to just record the intersection, and then we just count the vehicles that are passing through. So we have access to the video data that goes along with it. So we did the modeling for this intersection, and then just cross-referenced it to the video that we were watching. And we looked further into the model for this. It's interesting because it's a yield condition coming off of Stormytown Road onto the Parkway. The model just doesn't pick that up very well. Just the yield condition, it's a non-standard kind of intersection arrangement. The software is really based on calculations out of the highway capacity manual. So we actually changed that to a stop sign in the model in order to simplify and produce repeatable outputs. So it did change the results as they're presented in here. But we were finding that, yeah, it's difficult. The Parkway is backed up. The problem with the Parkway is honestly similar to the problems that are associated with the school. Oftentimes traffic is not passing through at a steady rate. We were finding just in observing the video that the Parkway regularly stalls and slows down. So, so getting off of Stormytown Road onto the Parkway is it's really just how much additional traffic is going to be entering and exiting the roadway. The right turns onto the Parkway, they have an acceleration lane. So we were finding that most traffic was coming and making a turn onto the Parkway. It's just the Parkway itself has so much traffic on it that it creates its problem. So.
Okay, so I think I was just thinking of this incorrectly, because this is seconds for, it's more like the intersection, not the actual Parkway.
Right, yeah,
Okay.
This is just the intersection with the Parkway. We didn't collect data further up and down the Parkway, because once you get on the Parkway, you're dealing with Parkway traffic, which is part of the reason why the New York State Department of Transportation is looking into possibly overhauling the corridor.
Okay, so to community members who would be concerned about the egress adding more traffic onto the Parkway, what would you say as like words of comfort? Like, they already know it's a problem and they're working on it, or?
Yeah, this is where it gets challenging to express to somebody, because there's delay comes in. It's basically, how do you determine what's an acceptable level of delay? And that's the challenge to express to somebody. In general terms, for levels of service and delay, like this is a big table of letters and numbers. To break it down further, the general acceptance is level of service D and better would be considered acceptable. Level of service A is not necessarily the goal of any project. That's just what it is. There's hardly any traffic on the road, and there's no delay. You can just breeze through. That's not practically how any road can work in an urban environment. So that's why we graded on levels of service A, B, C, D. It gets into E, and then there's Fs. So Fs is generally, you're experiencing a level of delay that would be unacceptable. That's when you're going to find drivers that are making risky behaviors to try to enter the traffic stream. So levels of service in D and better being in the peak hour traffic volumes. The interesting thing with schools are in the mornings, schools generally, arrivals and dismissals line up with the general peak hour of the adjacent road network. The dismissal times are usually offset from the highest peaks of the adjacent road network, so there is a break in the afternoons. Also, the school traffic, as we were finding in our 24-hour data collection, it doesn't peak the same way as it does in the morning. So really the mornings are what we're most focused on, and it's that traffic that's making the right turn from Stormytown Road onto the Parkway. So it really comes down to just trying to explain that the traffic volumes that are out there, there is not a large volume of traffic coming off of Stormytown Road. We have the numbers for the traffic data collection. You know, let me see if I can pull it up real quick. We're in the area of 200 vehicles that are making the turn in the morning and onto a parkway with an acceleration lane where there's no opposition to traffic. You can clear 200 vehicles onto the intersection quickly as long as the parkway is functioning. So, so making the connection on Stormytown Road is just providing an alternative. And as it is, we're making our best assumption on what direction people are go. If traffic is bad on any given day, they'll choose the alternative route. It's not consistent day to day. This is just another option for people to use, and our analysis is using what our best assumption is of an average usage.
Thank you.
Just quickly, and thank you for all the details. I think the point that's been raised that's really important that the community needs to hear somehow in a simple sort of chart is what Christine and Robert said, which is what happens on Van Cortlandt when we basically add the driveway and then we basically add another school. What's the impact? And, currently we have X number of buses. We have 40 buses or some number, 40 buses that are on Van Cortlandt. If we put the driveway out to Stormytown, we're anticipating taking 20 buses off of Van Cortlandt, and, we have a certain number of cars, and we're anticipating X number of cars. I think people need to see that in order to feel a comfort level that this isn't going to make things worse at the end of the day. I mean, if I look at the numbers and I use your estimates, you're 40%, I'm pretty confident. This looks good. But I think we're making assumptions, and I think if we can put that into a simple chart, that's something people need to see, because if the net result is traffic gets worse on Van Cortlandt with the new school building, that's going to be a very difficult, basically, position for us as the board. I don't think that's the case, and I'm confident you can articulate it, but I think we got to get that out in a very digestible way. The second point is just really with this smart light on Route 9, I think is really another important piece, because there's twice a day where that really becomes a problem for the schools, the kids crossing the streets, all this. We've talked about as a board approaching our legislators to try and bring traction to this issue. There's other places that have smart lights on Route 9 and other locations that would scream for a reason why we should have one there for a school. So I do think, appreciate that you've got that contact within there. I think any ideas on how we can work with you and also basically bring attention to this, because I'm not sure that that's an issue that needs to wait for a whole road diet implementation at the end of the day, because I do think that that's a real issue in terms of if you just get on Van Cortlandt, you see all those buses lined up when people are going to leave for work at the end of the day. You can tell it's not adequate amount of time for that to drain. And at different times and situations, we've had to have the police come and basically take traffic, and that's a whole issue with the state. But basically, getting people off of Van Cortlandt is a big deal. It can be done a lot better with a smart light. This intersection is screaming for it at the end of the day. So I think as a board, we have to think about how we approach. I know we've talked about it. I think we should bring a letter. But if you have ideas, Dave and CPL, in terms of how we can basically work on this, we should make this a priority. I think as much as the Stormytown exit and entrance, and I totally understand the need for that, we should really look at that smart light down at Van Cortlandt and Route 9.
Yeah, and I'll just say, opportunity is at our doorstep right now. With this project that has federal funds to improve Route 9, it's happening. Now it's just coordinating with them. So in my brief conversations with the consultant that's working on it, just to do the initial gathering, we've been trying to set up a meeting to meet with them, talk about what this project with the school is involving and what their project is involving. This will be an easy opportunity to work with them. As part of their process, they're going to be mandated to do public meetings and stakeholder engagement. And without us doing anything, I would expect that they would reach out to the school district.
that's really great to hear. I guess if I could be a little more direct and say, could you ask them where those opportunities will be so that we can basically be ready with that letter? I just don't want those opportunities to go by. And sometimes something gets dropped on a Friday going into a summer weekend and we miss the opportunity. So if we could be intentional in that, that would be great.
Yeah, we can do that.
I would just say sooner than later.
I'll do it tomorrow.
All
Anything
right,
else from me? All right.
great, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. Much appreciated.
And again, these are just the diagrams of the access road, et cetera, but we're up to the last part of this up to the board, just ask questions of our experts, Alita, Jared, or Jim.
I have some, I guess, well, let me ask you this, Mary. Do you have a list of issues that you would like the BOE to come to a decision on? And if so, what is that and when is that? Or are you asking us to sort of kind of talk amongst ourselves and sort of issue spot amongst ourselves?
Well, it's two things, right? And Alita, you can chime in, please, because you're probably much more informed about some of these decisions in terms of state guidelines. But right now, we have our team of experts here and our consultants. So if there are any other general questions, I know the board had a number of them. This is a great opportunity to ask while everyone is here. The second piece is that we have a budget preparation process coming up. And if the board would make a decision to move forward with this access road, this driveway now, it would need to be decided sooner rather than later because we need this information to calculate the tax cap levy because of the impact of a capital project on the levy cap formula. So our expectation would be, I think, Alita, we're expected to calc that and have that done at the end of February. So the board would need to make a decision sooner rather than later. And then this project would need approval by the state, and we'd have to move quickly on this. So sooner rather than later if the board chooses to do this.
Okay. All
And
right.
what information would you like from us or the team in order to help inform that? We have a meeting, a regular board meeting next week, if that's something the board would consider to vote on at next board meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
So I have some sort of like broader philosophical questions, right, which is not necessarily for you folks to answer, but really for us to dialogue on it as a board. But there are a couple of things that I just want to confirm. The board has been working very hard on, trying to figure out what are our questions, big questions, small questions, granular questions, macro questions, right? And I think a lot of the questions that I anticipated have already been asked throughout the course of the presentation tonight. I am wondering, for example, one of them was the bubble over the tennis courts. It sounds like anything is possible. If something like that, it was something that we wanted to do, it would cost more money than what we have been talking about today in this facilities proposal. Fair? Okay. And then in terms of the Stormytown Road access, if we were to separate that out from this facilities plan and put that into something that we were deciding as part of this year's budget, is anyone able to give us a general reference of like a timeline of the approval process of when we could expect to break ground on something like that and completion?
So if it was part of this year's budget, was approved, we would start the design process. Also would have to, of course, work with the town, the village. There's a lot of coordination that goes on with that, which That's a big unknown, getting those approvals, because this isn't just like putting an addition on the building where we're primarily dealing with SED. We have other local agencies that we have to seek approvals from. So our design process, let's call that 6 months review with SED, several months, but then there's also the town. So you're really looking at best, 2025 would be my guess.
Okay. I appreciate that. I appreciate that you're giving me sort of a hypothetical response based on your best guesstimate of a lot of unknown things, but also based on your experience. So thank you for that. And then it seems like to me, going back to the Stormytown access road or connection, whatever we want to call it, irrespective of our overall facilities plan, irrespective of what's going on with the Route 9 road diet, irrespective of the revision plan to 9A, that is something that needs to happen. Simply, if nothing else, to have an appropriate access point for emergency vehicles to be able to get into the campus as it exists now. Fair?
Yes.
2025-26 school year? Because this would be in a 24-25 budget. So it has to be approved.
I'm thinking construction, like when we would start construction.
Start construction.
Correct.
So so when would it be done?
Sorry, that's the full end-to-end driveway? But because there's still, yeah, because there are curb cuts and then potentially, I think, if there's any thought of sidewalks in there, I mean, I imagine if there is anything in there, we'd want to know what the impact on, like kids who weren't walking before to school now will, right? On that, and a road on Stormytown Road, which I don't believe has any sidewalk at all. So that, does that change anything?
That'll be vetted out in the early design process. So putting a sidewalk in is not going to dramatically increase the construction timeline.
Okay, because
it'll be incorporated with the work that's being done.
Because if somebody parks down at this parking lot down here at AMD, for whatever reason, walks up, they're walking on a sidewalk to get to somewhere, and I imagine if there's that sidewalk, would that have to be contiguous all the way to Stormytown Road, or what does that look like? So I'm just asking these questions because I didn't see that there was going to be necessarily a sidewalk that runs alongside, particularly if somebody drops off a kid on the campus, that sidewalk walking up to, or if they drop them off at the beginning of Stormytown Road and says, hey, look, kind of stuck here in traffic a little bit, get onto the sidewalk and walk down to your school building. That sidewalk, there would have to be something there to walk to, right?
Right,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt in that way. So I'll let you answer his question, but.
No, I was going to say that I don't believe that whole system with the sidewalk has been analyzed yet to figure out where does it start, stop, and what does it connect to. That is something that I know they haven't done yet.
Yeah, so I was just trying to help the board to understand the process. So if we were to put this into the 24-25 budget, it follows the same things that we normally have to do. We still have to do the seeker, which we checked with Chris. He doesn't feel it's going to be a negative declaration, and it should be turned around in time for the budget vote. So we have to do the seeker 45 days? 45 days, the board has to approve it. So he feels that can take place. So that should not be an issue. So that's the most important thing at this time. Roger, with regard to the specific questions, again, this is just an estimate. Like we have not all sat down and talked about the real scope. We just know it has to happen based on a traffic study. One thing that we did want to make certain of, and we had this discussion, and we still haven't detailed it, but we do want to have parking there. We want to add parking to that space. So that would also address some of the safety issues that are happening, because now there's more space and teachers are not being forced to park on the sides of the roads. When we were thinking about that space with the bond, we were considering using that middle space for middle school, for Claremont, and then the middle school having additional space with this new space as a result of this driveway. So the driveway would include additional spaces for parking, and it would also be tied to the AMD HVAC unit project so that we can get aid. So I didn't want to take us down a path, and I'm sorry I interrupted.
I'm still a little challenged with this one, and the reason why I'm challenged with this one is because if we're going to put a budget number, there's a difference between having just a driveway and a sidewalk, because that's new in terms of that there's going to be a parking lot for teachers. I think while it's great, there still needs to be something to walk on for
Yeah,
teachers
no.
to get safely to and from where they need to go to, and/or students in the future should we build that building.
But
right?
I just need you to understand that for this to happen, we have to have these deadlines met within the budget process as we normally do.
But what would we vote on? Are we voting on a number that includes?
Yeah, it would
What
be
would it include?
there'll be more than what's being presented tonight before that date. But those answers are not available at this time.
Okay, great.
So I just want us to understand the sequence of events, because we were asked what needs to happen.
Okay.
And in order for us to even consider this, we have to know what the tax cap limit is. So with the number that I asked them to provide us with is a number that I can take to the bank based on just the concept of what we're thinking about. If we find that it needs to be tweaked before the budget is voted upon and it doesn't impact seeker, then that's a different conversation. But March 1st is the deadline for the tax levy cap, and we have to have data in way before that date in order to come up with the tax levy limit cap. And the biggest impact on the tax levy limit cap is the capital expenditure, the capital exclusion. So I can't just throw a number in there, because I have to actually physically go in and report it to the state controller's office.
It sounds like at a minimum, if there's no student access or no public access, we still are budgeting for, at a minimum, emergency vehicle access.
I think we're doing more than that, but again, I'm just trying to help everyone understand the timeline. And I'm just going to take them off the hook. We don't have that level of detail yet, but we had a conversation, and I can't have them do anything further unless the board agrees that this is a step that we're going to undertake. And I can't with confidence say, until I do the budget, quite frankly, how much money we can use towards capital and what the tax levy limit increase is going to look like. Because, I don't want to get into this level of detail, but we have to have all this information available in order for me to be in a position to say this part is going to be used towards the tax levy, recommended, and this part may be used from reserves, recommended, and then you tell me what you want to do. But obviously, the tax levy limit requires a lot of information, and we need that information sooner than later.
So you're asking for a green light from us to explore this further so that we can get more information on
I
it.
think what we're asking for is a green light to not explore, a green light to move forward and make calculations
Right,
by next board meeting.
okay.
And the sense of the scope of this would be a two-lane driveway with additional parking, not parking that would end up being destroyed by the building of a 7th and 8th grade building if that were to come, but clearly parking to help, a sidewalk associated with it, plantings around it. That would be my general sense of the scope of what we're asking a green light from the board for us to work towards.
Okay.
I have
That would
a-
be some, oh,
Sorry.
go ahead, though.
It's just a general question. I don't know who would answer this, but would adding that egress make kids like in the Stormy Town area walkers? And do we have walkers that live on roads with no sidewalks?
That would be a concern of mine, just because there are no sidewalks to walk safely on in Stormy Town Road.
Well, we have that situation in other parts of the community.
Right.
So,
I do think we'd have to be consistent with the policy, and I don't know if it's to the driveway or to the front door of the building and how far you are away. But that's part of, I think, when you bring to us the budget information, you'd say, well, listen, if we did this, this would basically require estimating some of these students needing to walk, and then we'd have to basically fund that. Or, I don't know if state ed says there's no walkway, it's not a driveway, there's a different designation, but we would need to know that so we're consistent with the rest of the buildings. Because you got that situation all over Roosevelt, for instance. There's students that walk on sides of roads to get to Roosevelt at the end of the day. I know it's one of the buildings, so it's just, you have
There
this
is.
in other
I
parts of the district. Yeah.
understand, I just don't want to create more of the same if we don't have to. I want to just understand what the impact is. If we're gonna, if all of a sudden now an entire road of students that live on Stormy Town Road and maybe Cedar, I don't know, now have to walk where they didn't have to before, that's just it's a consideration, because we're changing a lot of things for people.
I agree, and this is why we have to be out there, but we can't, I don't think, selectively apply that. We have to be consistent with what we do in the rest of the district, and if we make that an official driveway at the end of the day, and that's how we basically designate whether you walk or not, then we got to be consistent, because it wouldn't be right to do that differently than you do in other buildings.
Understood. I just.
So that's why I asked the question, is just because I want to understand that, because that might affect my decision based on like student safety.
I have a question. So in the scope of the bond, it says like bus loop and parking is around 5 million. Let's just assume that and if I'm misunderstanding it, I know Alita, you'll jump in to correct me, please do. So if we build that on our own with our budget for next year, is it as straightforward as then the price of, what we're asking for the bond goes from 256 to 251? Like, I don't know if does the aid change, it feels like it should be straightforward, but I know that things rarely are, so that's why I'm asking.
I think if we're going down this path, then the whole bond itself has to be revisited in its totality.
Well, I mean,
I don't.
I would assume then that would no longer be in the bond if we were paying
Right,
for it
it
now.
will
That's
not.
why,
It will-
okay.
But there's other conversations that we need to have related to the bond and scope going
Right, but
forward.
that line item is not just for that road. It's for a lot of
Right,
other work that's in there,
yes,
plus
so
additional
it would be
parking
less
and-
than that because that encompasses the whole project and the
That's
assumption
correct.
that there's a building there, right?
That would be correct. And then on that analysis, you would be correct. I would delete that from the bond.
Okay.
So we had it to be continued a little bit more on on Roosevelt, because I remember there was a pretty sizable number in there for what we were going to do, because it was originally, when we first saw it, it was not aidable because of its administration offices. Then we came back and said, all right, let's change that to make that really much more instructional spaces. Do we have any prevailing updates or thoughts on
Yes.
what might come out of that, and now that changes the aidability equation now?
I think that the plan was to discuss that in exec.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, just circling back to the timeframe for developing the school district. A number of reasons. So just a consensus, does the board see that this driveway is needed and will improve and want us to move forward on it? It's just a matter, do you want to do it as part of a proposed bond, or do you want to do it now?
My question that I was going to ask before around that, as far as the timing, and I think what we're kind of saying also needs to be considered is how do we in this time limitation that we have, figure out the impact that doing that separately would have if we do move forward with the 7-8 building, or building a new building in general on that campus. Like, is it possible to have some kind of structural drafts to see what our options are around, if we do it beforehand, how can we prepare for what it is we might do on that campus in the future? I don't know really how to word it, but I'm just wondering the impact, whatever, if we do that before we do have any decision on what we're going to actually do with that campus in the long term, how many different variables can we kind of expect to have to be, like structurally to understand the impact of that decision on future decisions?
Sure. So I think if I follow you correctly, do the driveway, how does that impact potentially doing the 7-8 building later on? Is that?
Right, because if we were to do it now, I'm assuming we do it within the purview of how the campus is laid out now, right? So how do we get a draft of have the flexibility of whatever we do up there to potentially build more on that campus?
Sure. So that's kind of part of what we're hoping to get the green light on, is because we have to go through and kind of really redesign this driveway and run scenarios. Where is the sidewalk going to go? What side of this road is it, the driveway is it going to be on? Where are the curb cuts for the future parking lots so that we maximize flexibility? So we're reworking the parking lot so that when and if the bond is approved, the work that we're doing for that driveway is set to connect to that building later on without wasting money right now. So we're that's really like we have to massage that now, and that's part of the gymnastics that we're going through, and how does that impact the budget with that Paul's got to do. So we would have to run those different scenarios. But I think to answer your question, we're cognizant of that, especially with phasing, because we don't want to go and put something in and then rip it out later to put that 7-8 building in. We just want it to be seamless.
Thank you.
Sorry. I apologize if I'm being repetitive, but I guess what I'm getting at is, yes, I see the need for the egress. I just don't, in good conscience, I can't be like, yes, go ahead and do this if that's going to, without knowing the impact on the surrounding community and if those kids would be walking on a street without a sidewalk. Because I drive that street multiple times a day and I wouldn't want my kids walking on it. This is just something that I guess I need to know more.
I think that's what we're being asked to do, is permission for everybody to go and gather the information and do more, so that they can give us a more solid recommendation.
And I think a timeline, Alita, just to when that, so to get this green light to go ahead and to work on that, to figure that out, to give some sort of design, and then a decision would have to be made by what date, because the tax levy calc is due to the state. What date did you say before?
It's due March 1st.
March 1st, so there's a lot of work that needs to happen before that. So again, it's a very tight timeline.
I think the takeaway that we got as a team after hearing the presentation from David is that we know that, and it's good, it's great, that we know now that in order for the bond to move forward, that driveway has to happen. So if we don't move forward with the driveway, I understand your concerns about doing something worse. I don't think that we would do that. But if we are truly trying to go through with the bond, I think that's the only way that we're going to get there. And then in my head, and in our conversations, and Jim and Jared were on the call, I asked the question, is this going to result, by adding this, or do we see any negative impacts on students? And Jim did make the comment that it doesn't necessarily improve the situation for the people that live around the area. And so that's when we spoke about, having that parking space, additional parking spaces, so that it relieves some of the traffic and congestion for students while teachers are coming in. There's a separate space, available spots. We did not discuss number of spots, but we are trying to maximize this in a way so that it is safe for everyone involved and it improves. So if the bond doesn't never come to fruition, it's in our opinion and understanding, based on our consultants, that this needs to get done. And when we talk about why are we waiting, when we looked at the price tag, we just throw around numbers sometimes, 1,500,000. So me and Mary was looking at a document, and we thought the number was something else.
Yeah, I know.
And I said, Mary, I think there's a second page.
I know.
And we
There's
were like,
second
oh,
page.
okay.
Oh, there
So
was a second
there was
page.
a second page. So the number, we believe we can manage, but the only way I can determine that, I have to put everything into the budget. I can't, the tax cap, you have to report it in such a way where you have to put the exact amount of the things. And I can't put something in there without them fully vetting it, number one. I just had a conversation with Paul. I said, I need a number. Like, I can't just throw, he's like, I won't give you a placeholder. So I think I think the recommendation, not from me, I think from the team, is that this has to happen if we go forward with the bond, definitely. And even if we don't, it's a safety issue. And we keep talking about it, let's just address it. And we talk about we're not, doing things. This is something we may be able to do, but I can't make that decision unless I have the numbers to put in the complicated tax cap calculation.
Right. And I will add to what Alita just said, if we're talking about student safety. You have approximately 2,000 students on this campus alone. Never mind the residents and the staff members that work in both buildings. Having another layer of egress out of this is critical for the safety of those 2,000 people. And while we can advise community members, because I don't know a single community in Westchester that doesn't face the same points that Frank was making. There are many, many communities where kids walk on roads without sidewalks, and we can educate and we can do and we can move and we can encourage and we can tell people that's not what you should do. An education campaign and ask for all of that and do signage. However, the fire, the police, the ambulance corps of this campus itself, and Alteris, our safety consultants will tell you, a campus that has a single entry in and a single entry out poses a larger risk for everyone who's on it. So I think the traffic study shows that this will improve all of this, and this has been identified as an important risk. And just that, that's my opinion, it's the board's decision, is the reason why we feel that there are district funds you can use. We just need permission to move ahead and dig deeper into this. What are we looking at? Maybe $2 million. I don't know. You could probably do the same. The AC. I don't have those financial credit after my name, so I'll just put it out there. But my guesstimate on this would be that you could do the AC project for AMD and do this road within the school district budget for next year. But in order to develop that plan and talk about, the rough grading, the soilage, the digging, the putting down the item 4, whatever it is you need, the drainage for it all, the sloping of the driveway so that water drains correctly, all of these engineering feats to get an accurate price that we can give you on a budget, that's what we're asking for, is the green light to move forward on this.
I mean, it's certainly a green light for me.
Yeah, I'm a green light.
I'm green light as well.
On the green light.
I don't know if we picked up on the mic, but green light.
Green light.
I got one more finance question, Lita, for you and the team. So just going back to earlier, so I get it now. 2.78% increase in the levy, 0.56 over 5 years will cover off on everything. With that said, and this is probably not the right term, that increases sort of the cost basis, right, of the levy. You're increasing the levy to that. So now going forward, right, when you do budgets and regular, like, you're looking at that. So there is a long-term impact to the community besides the 5 years? Because now you've gone, the levy, you've increased, right, to this. So now the cost base is not the right terminology, but just put it under the finance guy. So with that said, if, this is kind of like a philosophical question, borrowing Catherine's term. If the board wanted to look at the current bond plan that's on the table and say, you know, 2.78%, we want to get it to 1, we want to get it to 0, we want to get it to 2. What's the best method to do that, understanding that different things are, it's not like just cut this out, add this, change this, because it's all aidable in different ways. And so not to make a ton of work where you have to, unless it's easy, you just throw it in a spreadsheet and boom, it automatically calculates. What would you recommend, smiling, what would you recommend the board wanted to look to an alternative to what's on the table to go look at? Should we go and say, well, maybe this stays, maybe this goes, and then we come back to you as a consensus, then you run the numbers again and say, yeah, that will get you to a 0.75
Yeah.
or a 1. Like, what's the best way to go about
I don't think we'd know that until you would probably give us, like, what the funding, what you would do, and that goes back to the question that I asked. What would you recommend that would, if we had to do with alternatives, that would say, okay, you would probably, if you did, I'm making this up, I don't know if this is true, if you did OHS, you did 7-8, that you're gonna get, you'll get probably your best funding ratio on that. Maybe we do that as like, that's one, and then, you know, at a later point, we take a look at that as an option, just to do that. And what might these different options look like, and what would that benefit, you know, in totality, right? Because I know there's always concern of carpe diem, right? You don't do it now, it's not going to get done, right? And that's always going to be the case in everything. And in a dream world, honestly, or a perfect world, not dream world, perfect world, we do all of this, right? But, you know, the reality is we kind of have to look at what are options.
Right, and so from a scope standpoint and the different items that we currently have in this scope, in the scope that Paul presented, it's easier for us to pick and place those together and see what a project would look like. So the questions that we received from the board had some of those various scenarios. So we could put those together and have an estimate based upon it. When we don't have numbers that Paul described earlier, the process being that the architect works on it, provides it to Paul to provide costs, and then provides it to us with the schedule, then that's where we run into a lot of variability where numbers we run we're not as confident in, what we would call gray area. So it's important that we have that process of any scope, whatever the number may be, the total number, we have that full scope document to work off of to run the numbers. Does that help to answer your question?
I think so. You're saying take the scope, look at it as a board, or however we do it, add, subtract, then come back with you, and then you say, okay, here it is. Is that what you're suggesting for a process?
That would be correct. You would need everybody, the whole team involved, because some of the decisions are going to affect other decisions. So I can't just arbitrarily just start cutting out portions of the building to just save money. I need the architects to basically guide this process into, well, we can change this. Well, that'll save X number of dollars, and we start developing it. We give those numbers to Andrew, and they basically recalculate it. So it's not really, let's just cut out X number of dollars. It's really starts with, the whole process started with the scope, and to modify it,
Okay.
it would have to do the same.
So it's not as clean like this, I wasn't here last year for the vote, but I was on that side of the table. When you do budget discussions, right, Super presents the budget up, and the board had said, okay, come back hypothetically with, instead of a 1.5, do a 0.75. And then, right, come back and it's like, okay, well, we took this out, took this 7.5, board says, great, off we go. It's not as clean as that, is what you're saying, right? We have to, there's other factors that go into it. So if we wanted to target on a levy for this project, I'm going to say a 0. That's not the way we should approach it, right? you can't come to us and say, okay, this will get you to 0. We have to sort of pick, and then you run the monitor and say, now you're at 0.5. If you want to keep going, keep going.
Correct.
right?
That's the best course of action. I mean, we could throw out a number, right, that we would, assuming all the assumptions here would get you to 0, but then if you came back to me with the project that did not look as I anticipated, we could be at a much larger number. So it's a better course of action to make sure that the architect, construction manager involved to produce the scope than that we can use to run those aid numbers. And we definitely do not want to be involved in programming, because we are finance, numbers, not programming. We leave that to merit professionals, Alita. So that's where we call it the gray area, don't want to be in those assumptions.
I got it, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, somewhat in that same vein of discussion, am I recalling correctly, several presentations ago, that in a nutshell, not to kind of deduce it, but in a nutshell, one of the advantages of the scope of this project was how much more we saved by putting it all into one project as opposed to compartmentalizing the projects, and how that actually increased the cost in the long run if we were to kind of separate out the projects and approach them, you know, just however at any moment of time. Was that one of the, do I recall that correctly?
Yes, if I follow what you're saying. Basically, this is say a master plan developing for all the schools. If you're going to break this down into individual projects and fund each one separately, it would extend the process. As you extend the process, you extend the amount of time it takes to build everything, which naturally would cost more. So yes, you have a savings in that as the process is sort of seamless, we move from one project to another project so that the project can be built in the shortest time possible. Otherwise, it'll be extended out for probably a 10-year period or so, or more.
Right, and just food for thought, I'm not saying this has to be done, but maybe in consideration of some of these calculations that we're throwing out there, especially in relation to the levy, I think that would be something to consider as well, how those long-term, how dragging it out could impact that over time as well, as opposed to another kind of way to save on that by putting it all together and having this, you know, kind of financial scope. So I'm just thinking out loud, not saying that's particularly a project you have to take on, but I think to that same vein of calculating how would taking out certain pieces of this bond affect probably this year's levy. I think if you consider over time, we have to come back and revisit some of these projects that we might consider putting to the wayside, how that might impact future, you know, finances. So I'm just thinking out loud.
I do want to point out in the email from the board, fiscal advisors did take time to do some of the scenarios that were questioned. So I don't know if you got a chance to look at it right before the board meeting, but that document was updated to reflect some of the questions that we were asked.
And that is utilizing the current scope, taking out, and then there are some projections in there, namely where the items that were asked for in the scope don't add up to the total cost of project that were asked for in the various projections, where we're in a much more gray area in terms of our projections. So just those numbers are a baseline, but we obviously would always want to use the formal process of having the architect look at numbers, design through Paul's office, and then come to us with an actual scope that we can be confident in. For multiple reasons when we run the projection.
On the biggest chunk of this, obviously, is the new construction, right? 142 million, I think, is the number. Is there anything in there that's, I mean, I guess we talked about tennis courts and turf field, but other than that, for the building itself, the building's the building, right? There's not any nipping and tucking we can do with that, correct? Like, is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I believe that'd be a fair statement.
Right, okay.
So does anybody have any other questions for our consultants? Any sort of other detailed questions?
I'm just going to throw this one last one out there, just because I was just looking at the questions that we sent in. Just as we look at the work that we do on, I certainly think that the work that we're doing here is great, and I think there's a lot of merit to doing this, right? But just as we look at this, I think we should also look at the traffic conditions also on M. Wilton as well, because I think we're opening up that church parking lot for parking, right? Is that still something that we've done or we're going to do?
We can. We're in discussions with Jared on that, and
Okay.
we can find 18 spots there.
Yeah, again, just keep in mind that M. Wilton's a hot mess in the morning and in the evening. So I would just say that when we look at that, I don't know what we can do talking to the village about that, but, I think that's just really hard with drop-offs and pretty unsafe spots and, lots of different things that are there. That's my general comment.
Are you saying, just to make sure I understand, are you saying as far as the parking, opening it up for parking, creating more of a
Yeah, so
issue?
what we're saying, what I understood in our last meeting was that the church parking was going to be opened up for additional spots, and just turning left into that spot coming off of Highland Avenue, that it just creates one more point, a choke point there on that road, particularly as whether it's students going up that way, parents dropping off. And again, right now, as it stands, I kind of find that pretty dangerous for a lot of kids, having to cross from one side to the other because they're being dropped off at random points on that road.
I think also, though, to remember, though, that used to be an active daycare there, so there used to be morning and afternoon traffic coming in and out of there, so I think it's probably a matter of evaluating the impact, I guess, of opening it back up now when it hasn't been open for so long.
Right.
But it used to be an active parking lot, but I definitely see your points, but possibly it might even alleviate some of the congestion, because I think a lot of the traffic back and forth are people, probably even staff, looking for some place to park, right? So maybe that will actually alleviate some of the congestion, because people have somewhere right to turn into and get off the road.
It could, and there was also at one point where we didn't really have that roadway that was there, that was built more recently than anything, but I do think it's important just to address that, like, what can we do? Again, for me, student safety is really critical. I mean, I think about these kids as they're getting dropped off, and God forbid, I hate to see something happen, and just adding some more cars or another left turn that you make there, that makes it dangerous, right?
It is 18 spots, though. It's not, I don't know how many were there before when it was, but it's 18. It's not a huge number, but.
It's
again,
not, but still.
Yeah, it will
Right.
take pressure off the going around and trying to
Sure.
find parking in the main lot. I
Sure.
think.
I'm, again, not worried so much about the 18 spots as much as I'm worried about the current conditions now, right? So.
I have a couple of financial questions that are more broad picture questions, so I'm going to go ahead and take the time to ask them now. But one of the questions that I had asked leading up to this, and some of my colleagues have already mentioned it, was the possibility of splitting the facilities plan into two bond votes in the community, one of them being, for example, renovating the high school with the church that was purchased, as well as the proposed renovations at the elementary schools first, which my understanding is like approximately 103.5 million, using 17 million in capital reserve and 5.4 million transfer to capital. This wouldn't have a tax impact, but then to do the second part separately, which would be the renovations over here to the AMD campus and then adding the second school, would exceed the anticipated building aid and allocated resources of the district and show a tax impact. But are we able, is that the same impact that we're talking about as the overall package, or are we able to get any kind of understanding if that would be a greater impact than the .56 5 years in a row that we've been talking about?
Off of, I think it would probably be, without seeing the detailed scope of the timing of when we would do that issue, so how that would impact debt that's falling off and running each of those scenarios.
Let's say March for the first part, September for the second part.
Sorry, not of the vote, of the when those construction costs
Okay, got it.
would occur, yeah. It would roughly have the same impact, but that second project would be presented to the voters as having a larger impact than it does now.
I see.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
phase one would have no impact. Phase two would have, from an optical standpoint, what appears to be a much greater impact when considered separately from the two combined together in one whole plan.
Correct.
Okay.
Roughly speaking, again, not having exactly run that exact scenario.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful to clarify. And then another question that I was hoping to get the answer to, and really I'm just saying, I'm saying this out loud for the benefit of folks who are watching, because I think it's important that the community appreciate that the board is taking the time to review these various scenarios and talk them out as hypotheticals. But so if we were to keeping the plan as it exists, but cutting from that to reduce the overall size of the plan, if we were to cut the Roosevelt renovations, the additional athletic fields that are proposed for the new middle school campus, and then renovations to Brookside, for example, that would hypothetically get us down to around an overall facilities plan of about $223.7 million, which would be an estimated tax impact of 1.62% spread over 5 years.
Correct. That's what we calculated with that specific scope that you had outlined, yeah.
Okay, and then under the same vein, if we were to change that up a little bit and remove for example, the music wing at the high school as proposed, I believe the gym at the high school, and the student comments at the high school, we'd actually, and this is a great example, right, and remove some of the Claremont classrooms. Although that would, removing those things, actually the overall facilities plan would be less at $220 million. The tax impact, which I'm presuming is because of the ratio of aid, and new building versus renovations to existing buildings, would actually be 1.71%.
That is the calculation that we did, yes, with that second scenario.
Okay.
Based upon exactly the ratio of aid as well as the length of aid that is paid based on the projects being renovations, additions, or new building, and then how the debt is amortized off that aid flow.
Okay, so that's a perfect example of showing how it's not as simple as basically saying take the levy that you're recommending of 2% and move it down to 0.5%, and what positions would you not add on if we were asking you to do that, in order to really have, because we can remove $30 million from this overall plan, but the impact on what we would need to levy, it could be very different based on what is encompassed by those $30 million. So if the board were to collectively decide, look, this is a number that we really would like to get this down, what we really need to start with is, here's our list of all of the projects that we feel that the district needs, that we want to do, but here are the things on the list that we're prioritizing last and sort of the timing. And if we are going to have to start removing things from the list, you would need to know from us, what are your 4 projects that you want, that you're willing to remove for the list. We would have to come to a consensus on that, and then you could go forth and get us a more accurate calculation.
Correct, yes.
Okay. All right, I think that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can I say one last thing? Not to drag this out, I know we've been here a long time, but I just had a epiphany when we talk about considerations of what we take out. When it comes to the Roosevelt building specifically, I know this number is under the assumption that it would be alternative space and administrative offices, but wouldn't there now, if we were to even consider not doing that, then we'd have to talk about what it would cost to renovate it so that, because there's a compliance issues with that building as well, right? So this number doesn't factor in some of those compliance-related renovations that we need to do at Roosevelt, right? This is just simply if we wanted to reimagine it as an alternative space and administrative offices, right? I don't know if I'm asking the right people the right question, but I'm just thinking as far as, I think that's one building that's a bit complicated with either we go this direction or we don't, and that number can change drastically for just that one building.
That would be correct. That number was a budgetary number based on an assumed renovation of that building. That's so, yes, if you program it, we would run a new cost basis for that program.
Thank you.
I got one last one since we've been talking turf fields and tennis courts, and it's been some time that I think we've talked about that. The request to do that, was that based on kind of like, I'm not going to call it nice to have, but was that kind of like, well, if we're going to build another school, therefore you need a certain amount of turf field and tennis court to accommodate that up there? Like what was, and it's almost to my fellow board members' questions of that question as well, unless you have the answer. Like where did that request come from? Is that based on, you're going to build a school, you need 4 more field, X amount of square footage on a turf field up there. So, because it's come up a few times, like, okay, do we cut that out? I want to make sure if we go down that road that we're not really, I don't know, it's a spider face on that one as well.
So that goes back quite a ways to when we were programming, and from what I recollect, a lot of it had to do with playtime throughout the district. So I don't remember the particular details. I'd have to dig that up because it was quite some time ago, but it was a playtime related issue where there's a lot of students and teams just not, like playtime is extended late hours or not at all.
I'm so sorry.
I'll add some color to the committee to that. We had students contact the board as well as put letters also in the current regarding this issue and field availability, and also equity and parity amongst basically girl sports and boy sports. So at the end of the day, you have needs for the daytime for the school, for the usage and facilities, and to think, you're going to throw another grade in, but you're going to have enough outdoor stations on one turf field for now 4 grades to the same gym class. I think there was some of that analysis done, but there was an analysis, there was also feedback solicited from basically the students, and I've seen it with my own kids. You have a boys soccer game at the high school, and you have girls that don't have practice, and vice versa. You'll have that where they won't get it. And then you'll have JV teams going much later into the evenings, and you'll have, questionably different standards of fields for girl sports versus boy sports. So I think that was just consideration amongst the equity in the district to basically put this forth. I think pretty much all of these proposals go in front of the community. I think you'll have different groups that'll support different things, and that's the great challenge we have of trying to find that compromise at the end of the day. But I do think engaging the community on this is really important in terms of just, I think everybody's going to have a different set of priorities, and there will be no one person who's happy with everything that is in or not in the bond, right? I think that's just the nature of this game.
If this already exists or someone else has already asked and gotten an answer, please direct me there. But I was curious if it would be possible to see, like Lita mentioned that if you don't do certain projects, you lose out on building aid and other things. I'm curious what it would look like to kind of take away some stuff but still be able to maximize it and see if that changed the tax levy. I don't know if I'm asking this properly. If not, I will try to clarify
So
some more.
are you asking if we take away some projects, how that would change take away some projects in the current scope, how that would change the tax levy?
Let me ask you this, I think I would know what she's getting at, like, if you were able to give us a list that says, what are our maximum aidable projects, right? That would sort of, I guess, leave us with, towards the end of the list, where we know, what would potentially get us the least bang for our buck in terms of reimbursement from the state. Is that along the lines of what you're going after? That would maybe help us be able to prioritize, like, these things are gonna be max aidable, so, like, that's sort of like the best case scenario.
So to keep it in simple terms.
I just want to make sure that she's
okay.
going after.
Yeah, I guess I just want to know, like, the least we can spend and still get the maximum benefit. Because Alita, I think, had mentioned that if we didn't do Roosevelt, we lose out on some building aid, and it ends up being more expensive. So, like, keeping the same aid and everything, what could we get rid of to potentially lower the tax levy? And this is only if, like, the rest of the board also wants to see this. I'm just curious.
You're talking about that 2.78 or that tax levy, that one you're talking about?
The 2.56.
Yeah.
So in that email that we were sharing with the board, there are scenarios in there that they did. And then they also had a separate email that they sent out on Friday with other scenarios in there. So if you want to take a look at those first, because we know the scope of those, it would be easier. There was one scenario to get to zero. Obviously, you would have to reduce the scope, but it would be reducing it by 58 million.
I'm sorry,
And we
by how
can't-
much? By how much did you say?
I don't want to talk off the top of my head.
And this, again, this includes work that we just took out to create these scenarios. So this has a lot of variability in it, but it would be 86 million with the new building, and then without the new building, 84 million. We have it on here.
That you would take out?
That, to get to the zero, yes, correct.
That you would take out of the 256?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
so
But
that-
again, I'll preface this with, it's variable because we just took different projects out to create these scenarios.
And then there was a scenario where you had to find additional scope
That is correct,
of
too.
58 million. So Annie, if you want to just look at that, if you have any questions, I could answer them tomorrow. There were several scenarios that were presented.
Do you remember what the email was titled?
I can resend it to you.
Okay.
I have it up, I'll send it now.
That's the one that came from Nicole, I think.
Did you have a simple on the,
I was just going to say, in terms of strictly looking at the building aid, any renovations are always more highly aided than additions and new buildings. That's just how the state aids projects.
So, sorry, renovations more than a new building?
Yep.
I thought it was the other way around. I thought it was the new building more than the renovations.
No, so the new building and the addition work, those are based strictly on what you're actually building. And in our experience, those are always less aided than renovations to an existing building.
Oh, interesting.
There's also the document that was shared, and I can reshare it on Friday. I think maybe Nicole shared it with Mary's update. The assumptions, like, there's a page at the beginning of their slideshow that shows the assumptions, so you don't have to commit it to memory. So just, I can resend it.
Yeah, if you could, what are those differentials in the aid between a new building versus a reno?
As in, what are we assuming versus?
So one 69 cents, the other one is what? So,
what you're referring to is the building aid ratio?
yes,
That is applied to all aidable work. So that is uniform across all aidable work within the project. Now, the aidability of that work, of the new building work, of the addition work, and of the renovation work, that is where it differentiates. So
Right.
the renovation work is always more aidable at your building aid ratio than the new building or addition work.
and you have something that shows us then for it, the renovation, so then everything, the church itself would be a renovation, right? Not a new building?
It's a new building.
It is considered a new building?
It would technically most likely be considered an addition to the high school, because it is not, I don't believe it's
It has its own,
currently,
it has its own building number.
but the idea is to join the buildings together.
Yeah, but
correct?
right now it
Yeah.
has its own building number through SED, right?
Okay, so, all right, so this number of that we've been hearing for a while, 69 cents or whatever it may, I'm just trying to understand so it's clear in my head. Is 69 cents a number that is an average between renovation and new, and aidable, I assume everything's aidable, that is aidable, is 69 cents per dollar reimbursement from the state. Is that for just the renovations, or is it for the renovations? I'm just trying to understand that.
That is applied to any work that the state deems eligible for aid.
Okay, so of the 142 million, you're saying only not, that full building is not going to be aidable?
Correct.
That only maybe like 50% of it's aidable, or 40% is aidable, or something like that? And do you have that has an estimation of what that looks like?
Like what we're assuming right now?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what,
yeah, that's-
John went over it earlier in this meeting, and it's, for the new building, it's 50%. We also have it broken down. Alita can send it out, a whole aid assumption.
Yeah, can we get that? Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for all of the projects, right?
Correct. It breaks it down into the renovations as well as the
Additions
new
and
building
the-
and additions.
It would be helpful to see that detail.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, so the 69 is current, as you noted, it actually dropped.
It did.
67.5 for
yes.
what, 24, 25?
Yep.
So is that variable, like?
Every year it's recalculated, and it's based on the district's wealth compared to the rest of the state.
Got it. So in theory, so even if we locked something in whatever budget year, and it goes through the process, for the life of the project, could that fluctuate from 69, 67.5, goes to 70, drops to 50? Like, it could in theory do kind of that, right? Or no?
So the numbers are not final yet. I know for certain the numbers are not final yet. So I've been hesitant and because I did find that out today. But they're not final yet, but you're right, it did go down to 67. But we're in the process of evaluating each aid expense number. Obviously, what I normally do is I have a conversation with Questar to get a sense of why it dropped. Questar is like our state planning through BOCES. They help us with understanding the state aid, and they'll have a webinar eventually that'll come out. But they've already gone through the process of saying that the foundation aid numbers are not final. So that number isn't final yet, and there's a variety of reasons why it's not final. It's actually based on data from the ST3 from the 22-23 expense year. And as you know, the business office has had some challenges in our staffing. So that data may not be up to date. So I will be reaching out to Questar tomorrow to get a better understanding of why that number dropped before we start socializing it in the community. So just to clarify.
Yeah. And so how does that fluctuation impact this whole, your whole amortization chart? So if it goes 69, 67, up, down, like how does that impact the way?
It's based on the commissioner approval date.
No, I'm right, but how does that impact, us in terms of out-of-pocket cost if it can change every year? And does it? So all your
But it doesn't change every year, right?
It's
We
locked
lock it
in.
in.
So it's locked in by, right, that's what I'm saying. So we lock it in if we sign, okay, right now, we're not locking it at 69. We've missed that window. So we would lock in theory, if this stays at 67. Is it correct?
I can tell you in all the years that I've been here, I never saw it drop that low. So I need to research that number. So it's good to ask the question. But like I said, I need to understand from Questar why that number changed the way it did.
Right. But saying once we've adopted, gone through the process, we're locked in at whatever the the ratio, aid ratio is at that time we've adopted and gone through the process.
It's
So,
a
right, okay, so you're,
Commissioner approval date, right?
Your building aid ratio is recalculated every year, and it's based on the
That building aid ratio is locked in for that project.
the assumed rate in which the project is aided is locked in.
For that project.
The assumed interest rate.
No,
for
no,
which
no, the
project-
building aid ratio. The building aid ratio is locked in when the commissioner approves it, right? The project?
It is not.
So when is it locked in?
It's not locked in. It is
Not the
recalculated.
interest rate.
Right, your building aid ratio is recalculated every year.
That's different than I remember that being presented to us in the past.
Yeah, same here. It's all, we knew it as always like, once it's done, we lock it in what that building aid ratio is.
Right, because community members engage in a vote based on a commitment, based on bonds they take out. I mean, there was a lengthy conversation about all that.
But in turn,
Can we circle, is that something we need to drill down on? And, I mean, it is. Which, if we need more time to do that, we can definitely have.
and in terms of our projections, because it's across the board with other projections that are done in the same manner, that do come out consistently to be accurate or conservative. So it hasn't made that much impact unless there's a dramatic change. But yes, we can do that.
right, and we don't need to do that here, but the point is like we've been saying 69. So if it goes to 67 one year, and then it's 70, and then it goes to 64, what is the impact for the community out of the pocket for those change of the year? Like that to me is really important, at least. If we can't calculate it, I think it's fair to say to the community, in theory, this could have an impact, blank, fill in the sentence, right? I think that's, because to the other board members bringing this, and my recollection too, 69, 69, 69, we sign, that's not changing. If the state dropped it to 0, we still got the 69. And if that's not accurate, fine, but what's the impact then to our annual budget? Is there one that we are now paying more on interest? The local share goes up, what does that look like? And I think we just kind of need to know that so we can message it to the community before we vote.
And definitely confirmation that this does fluctuate, because that's going to have a significant impact on this entire project.
Well, as I said before, it typically does not fluctuate significantly to the point where it would have any drastic impact on the project.
But it would have a drastic impact on our budget.
When he says the project, we mean the local share of the actual project. and what we're
Understood, but
impacted
year
by.
on year, it would have an impact on our budget depending on what goes down, right?
Correct, but not probably if it dropped from, let's say, what it did from 69% to 67, all other assumptions being the same, it probably wouldn't change those percentage impacts.
Can we just confirm whether or not it does lock or it does not? Can we confirm that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, 'cause we had heard that the foundation aid, which can be fluctuating, but once a commitment is made and a community votes on something with a certain level of commitment, I mean, that was part of our Q&A. We went through that. We had a lengthy conversation here about that. So, again, a little different now.
Right, and maybe it's not this one for one, but if you drop 2%, right, you're not saying that the 69 to 67, it's not a 2% of the 256 million, right? Because that would be $5 million. That's a chunk. It's not a one for one, fine, but what could be the impact in a drop, and what could be the positive impact If it goes up, does that mean there's less out of, we're on the hook for less and the state's on the hook for more? Or again, if it goes down, well, we're on the hook more and the state's kicking in less. I think we just need to understand that. Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, you said it's based upon community wealth, and I don't know what that means in terms of where we've been going. So, I mean, imagine as part of your financial calculations, you probably are looking at community wealth as part of that. But again, this is really critically important because this was completely different.
I do hope to have an update by Friday for the board, just to strictly look at what the numbers mean. Part of what ASBO did was evaluate the foundation aid numbers, because now foundation aid is actually running. They did do a PDF that describes, it actually will answer a lot of your questions, because what bothers me the most is if you looked at I didn't talk to you about state aid today, but if you looked at that foundation aid, the wealth factor, it didn't go down, it went slightly up. So I'm really confused as to that building aid ratio number to be so dramatically reduced. So I just need to better understand, and we could talk about it related to this project, but I first need to have a conversation with Questar to see why it changed. Because even when we were talking about the change, I actually talked to you and Questar about the possibility of such a dramatic change, because those questions came up, and we had a Q&A related to that. The likelihood of that was not likely. So for me to see that, I just think there's something with the reporting that's occurring. And I have some background about the business office and the transients sea of positions that was responsible for reporting that data.
All right, well, we'll get to the bottom of it, right? Anything else? All right, well, I think we've held captive long enough. You guys are definitely in the hot seat. We really appreciate it. I hope you understand we're just really trying to do our due diligence and, really make sure that we have a really good handle on it. This is a really big project, so thank you for going through that exercise with us.
I just also want to thank all of the consultants, and Jim and Jared didn't, Jim didn't get out. He'll be back. I just really want to thank them, because they literally respond to things immediately for us. And I think this team is great. And we're going to get to the bottom line of the building aid conversation, but based on a board meeting that he wasn't part of. And they all do that kind of work. I've been working with Paul for many years, and he's that type of person as well. So I just want to thank them, because this has been a process, and they sit here and they sit for long hours, and the work is not paid in the time that they spend. So I just want to take the time to thank you, because sometimes it appears that I'm being tough, but I'm not. I just need to make sure we have the right answers and we're consistent. So thank you.
Here, here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this guy in the back.
Well, I guess, I don't know if we can ask, free these gentlemen up to go home to their families.
Yeah.
Is that okay with the board? All right.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Many of them have long drives, too.
Yes.
You recognize that.
Thank you.
So now, Mary, I'll ask you, as everyone is clearing out, if we are to go forward with this plan, we need to vote on it as a board. and have a consensus towards that at the next meeting, which is January 24th. Is that correct?
To hit if you want to have a referendum in March.
Okay. And so you have the green light from us on the, further developing the idea of the traffic, I don't know what I'm trying to say, it's late. The
Access road,
Stormytown Road access road. So I guess, what do we need as a board to come to a consensus on tonight? Is that anything? Is that something that we can say what our positions are on the 24th? What's the appetite of the board to engage in further dialogue just as a board on this?
I would really like to talk to the board in executive
Yeah.
session.
Okay,
We do. We have a, yeah.
okay. Yeah, we do need to take public comment. I'll do that in a second. I just sort of wanted to. Okay. No, I just wanted to, I don't want to take public comment and then have us go to our adjournment. I wanted to make space. If there's a dialogue that board members feel like they need to have before the 24th, and they want to have it now, I want to make sure that the opportunity is now. Okay, I see people holding their bags, so I'm taking the hint.
Yeah, I want to get out of here.
All right, I'm going to now start the public comment section of the meeting. There's no one here in person with us in the audience that I can see, so I will go ahead and ask Illy if there's anyone virtually who has a hand raised. Okay, there being no show of hands, I will take a motion to enter into executive session to discuss a potential real property matter.